7 children, 1 blizzard, and a man who'd already buried his whole world. When Caleb Turner rode into Silver Ridge that frozen January night, he had no intention of staying. He'd spent 5 years running from the graves he couldn't face, a wife, 3 small children, all taken by fever in a single brutal week. He was a ghost in a living man's skin, drifting from town to town, never stopping long enough to remember what it felt like to care. But then he saw them. 7 pairs of eyes staring out from behind a church, waiting in silence for something that might never come. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this journey travels. The wind cut through Silver Ridge like a knife through canvas, sharp and merciless. It was the kind of cold that didn't just chill your bones, it settled into your soul and made a home there. Caleb Turner pulled his coat tighter as his horse, a weathered bay mare named Dust, picked her way down the main street. The town was small, probably no more than 300 souls huddled against the Montana wilderness like it was trying to disappear into the mountains themselves. Caleb had seen a dozen towns just like it in the past 5 years, each one blurred into the next. Different names, same desperate hope that tomorrow might be kinder than today. He never stayed long, couldn't. Every town had churches with bells that rang at noon, general stores that smelled like flour and coffee, children laughing in schoolyards. Every town reminded him of what he'd lost. The Silver Ridge Hotel sat at the end of the street, a 2-story structure that had seen better days. The paint was peeling and one of the shutters hung crooked, banging against the wall in the wind. Caleb dismounted, his boots crunching in the frozen mud. He'd stay 1 night, maybe 2 if the weather turned worse. Then he'd move on. He always moved on. "Stables around back," a voice called out. An older man stood in the doorway of the hotel, pipe in hand. "$1 a night for the horse, includes feed." Caleb nodded. "Obliged." He led Dust around the building, past stacks of firewood and a broken wagon wheel, to a small stable that looked like it housed maybe 6 horses at capacity. Only 2 stalls were occupied. He unsaddled Dust, brushed her down, and made sure she had water and hay. The mare had been with him through everything, bought her the week after the funerals, when he couldn't stand to look at anything that reminded him of the farm, of the life he'd built and lost. "You planning on staying in Silver Ridge long?" Caleb turned. A boy stood in the doorway of the stable, maybe 17, with sandy hair and a cautious look in his eyes. He wore clothes that had been mended more than once, and boots that were too big for him. "Just passing through," Caleb said. The boy nodded slowly, like he'd expected that answer. "Most people are. Not much here to stay for." "You work for the hotel?" "Sometimes. Help out where I can." The boy hesitated, then extended his hand. "Name's Daniel Marsh." Caleb shook it. The kid had a firm grip. "Caleb Turner." "You look like you've been riding hard, Mr. Turner. Storm's coming in tonight. A bad one, they say. Might want to hole up for a few days." "Maybe." Caleb wasn't one for small talk, but there was something earnest about the boy that kept him from walking away. "Town always this quiet?" Daniel's expression darkened. "It is lately. We lost some folks last winter. Illness, mostly, and—" He trailed off, glancing toward the back of the stable, like he was checking to see if anyone was listening. "There's been some trouble, but I shouldn't speak out of turn." Caleb finished securing Dust's stall. "Trouble's everywhere, son. Nothing new about that?" "I suppose you're right." Daniel shifted his weight. "There's stew at the hotel if you're hungry. Mrs. Patterson makes it fresh every evening." "Appreciate it." The boy left, and Caleb stood there for a moment, listening to the wind howl through the gaps in the stable walls. He could feel the storm building, not just in the air but in his chest. That old familiar ache that never really went away, just dulled to a manageable throb most days. He thought about Sarah's laugh, about the way little Thomas used to run to him when he came in from the fields, about Margaret's quiet questions about the stars, and baby Anna's tiny fingers wrapped around his thumb. He pushed the memories down, locked them away in the place where he kept everything he couldn't afford to feel. The hotel was warmer than he expected. A fire crackled in the main room, and the smell of beef stew and fresh bread made his stomach growl. A woman in her 50s, gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, looked up from the front desk. "You must be the stranger Daniel mentioned. I'm Helen Patterson. Room and board is $3 a week, or 50 cents a night if you're not staying long." "One night," Caleb said, pulling coins from his pocket. "Maybe two." "Suit yourself." She took his money and handed him a key. "Room 4, top of the stairs, supper's included. There's coffee on the stove if you want it." Caleb took the key and was about to head upstairs when the door burst open, letting in a blast of frigid air and 3 men in heavy coats. They stomped the snow from their boots, laughing about something. The one in front was tall, probably in his late 40s, with silver threading through his dark hair and eyes that swept the room like he owned it. "Helen?" the man said, his voice carrying authority. "Is Doc Merritt still upstairs?" "He left an hour ago, Mr. Crow." Helen's tone was respectful, but Caleb caught the tightness around her mouth. Damn, I needed to speak with him. Crow noticed Caleb then, his gaze sharpening. "New in town?" "Just passing through," Caleb said evenly. "Harland Crow." The man didn't offer his hand. "I own the Triple C ranch north of here. Always interested in capable men if you're looking for work." "Appreciate the offer, but I'm not staying." Crow studied him for a long moment, then shrugged. "Your loss. Good ranch hands are hard to find these days. Helen, if you see Doc Merritt, tell him I need to speak with him about the Rowe situation." "I'll tell him," Helen said quietly. Crow and his men left as quickly as they'd arrived. The warmth seemed to drain out of the room with them. "Who's Rowe?" Caleb asked, though he wasn't sure why he cared. Helen's face pinched. "The Rowe children. 7 of them. Orphaned when their parents died in a cabin fire last month. It's a terrible situation." She shook her head. "But it's not my place to gossip. Your stew's getting cold, Mr. Turner." Caleb took his bowl to a table by the window and ate in silence, watching the snow begin to fall. 7 orphans. In a town this small, someone should have taken them in by now. He'd seen it before, communities pulling together when tragedy struck. But Helen's expression suggested this was different somehow. "Not your problem," he told himself. "You're leaving in the morning." He finished his meal and went upstairs. Room 4 was small but clean, with a narrow bed and a washstand. He hung his coat on a peg, pulled off his boots, and lay down fully clothed. The wind rattled the window, and somewhere in town, a dog was barking. Sleep didn't come easy. It never did. He woke before dawn, restless and cold despite the blankets. The storm had intensified overnight. He could hear it battering the hotel. He dressed, splashed water on his face, and headed downstairs. The main room was empty except for Helen, who was stoking the fire. "Coffee's ready," she said without turning around. "Don't expect that storm to break before noon. You'll be here another night whether you planned on it or not." Caleb poured himself a cup and stood by the fire. "Those children you mentioned last night, where are they now?" Helen straightened, surprise flickering across her face. "Why do you ask?" "Just curious." She studied him like she was trying to decide how much to say. "They've been staying in what's left of their parents' cabin, from what I hear. But the structure's not safe. Half the roof caved in from the fire. Some folks have tried to help, brought them food and blankets, but..." She trailed off. "But what?" "But nobody's taken them in. 7 children is a lot to ask of anyone, especially in a winter this hard." Helen's voice dropped. "And there's been talk that Mr. Crow wants to take custody. Says he has the means to provide for them properly." "And people believe that?" "Mr. Crow is the wealthiest man in the county. He has influence." Helen's jaw tightened. "But there are stories about his ranch, about how he treats the people who work for him. Nothing anyone can prove, mind you, but..." Caleb set his cup down. "Where's this cabin?" "Mr. Turner, I don't think, but..." "Just tell me where it is." Helen sighed. "Behind the old church on Miller Road. But in this storm, you won't make it there and back safely. I've ridden through worse." He went back upstairs, grabbed his coat and hat, and headed to the stable. Dust was restless, sensing the weather. Caleb saddled her quickly, ignoring the voice in his head that told him this was foolish. He'd learned to ignore that voice years ago. It was the same one that had told him to keep living after Sarah and the children died, and he'd been fighting it ever since. Miller Road was on the eastern edge of town, barely visible through the driving snow. The church was a small wooden structure, its white paint long since stripped by wind and weather. Behind it, barely standing, was what remained of a cabin. Part of the roof had collapsed inward, and one wall leaned at a dangerous angle. Caleb dismounted and approached carefully. The door hung crooked on its hinges. He pushed it open. "Don't come any closer." The voice was young but steady. Caleb's eyes adjusted to the dim interior, and he saw them, 7 children huddled in the back corner, wrapped in blankets that looked too thin for this kind of cold. The oldest, a boy of maybe 14, stood in front of the others. He held a piece of wood like a club. "I'm not here to hurt you," Caleb said quietly. "I heard about your situation." "We don't need charity," the boy said. His eyes were hard, old beyond his years. "We're managing fine. This cabin's going to collapse. You can't stay here. We don't have anywhere else to go." Caleb counted them. 7, just like Helen had said. The youngest couldn't have been more than 5 or 6, a little girl with dark curls and huge eyes. One of the boys, maybe 8 or 9, was shivering violently despite the blankets. "How long have you been here?" Caleb asked. The older boy's grip on the wood didn't loosen. "What's it matter to you?" "Just answer the question." 3 weeks, since the fire. 3 weeks in a half-collapsed cabin, in the dead of winter. Caleb felt something crack in his chest, something he'd kept carefully sealed for 5 years. "My name's Caleb Turner," he said. "I'm staying at the hotel in town. What's your name?" The boy hesitated. "Micah. Micah Rowe." "Well, Micah Rowe, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Can you do that?" Micah nodded slowly. "How many of you are sick?" One of the other children, a girl about 12 with long brown hair, spoke up. "Noah's been feverish for 2 days, and Samuel's cough is getting worse." Her voice cracked. "We've been giving them water, but—" "Clara, don't," Micah said sharply. "Micah, they need help." Clara looked at Caleb with desperate eyes. "Please, I don't know what else to do." Caleb moved closer, slowly, keeping his hands visible. "Which one is Noah?" Clara pointed to one of the twins, identical boys around 9 years old. The one she indicated was flushed and glassy-eyed, breathing shallowly. The other twin sat beside him, holding his hand. "How long has he been like this?" Caleb asked. "Since yesterday morning," Clara said. "He's getting worse." Caleb looked at Micah. "I'm taking him to the doctor. You can come with me or stay here, but that boy needs medicine." "We can't pay for a doctor," Micah said. "I didn't ask if you could pay. I said he needs medicine." Caleb moved toward Noah, and Micah stepped in front of him. "Why are you doing this?" The boy's voice shook slightly. "You don't know us. Nobody in this town cares what happens to us, so why do you?" It was a fair question. Caleb didn't have a good answer. "Because someone should," he said finally. "Now move aside." Micah held his ground for another few seconds, then stepped back. Caleb knelt beside Noah and felt his forehead, burning hot. The boy's eyes fluttered open. "It's okay," Caleb said softly. "I'm going to help you." He lifted Noah carefully. The boy weighed almost nothing. "The rest of you, gather what you can carry. We're leaving." "Leaving?" Micah's voice rose. "We can't just—" "This cabin is going to come down on your heads, maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow. You're coming with me." Caleb looked at each of them. "All of you." "Where?" Clara asked. "I don't know yet, but anywhere's better than here." The children moved quickly, gathering their few possessions. Caleb noticed how little they had. A few changes of clothes, some blankets, a tin cup. No toys, no books. Just the bare essentials for survival. "Can you ride?" he asked Clara. "A little." "Good. You'll ride with me. Micah, help the others walk. Stay close to the horse. The storm's getting worse." They made their way back to town slowly, fighting against the wind and snow. Noah was unconscious in Caleb's arms, and the other twin, Samuel, Caleb learned, walked beside the horse, his hand gripping the stirrup. The little girl rode in front of Clara, wrapped in Caleb's coat. By the time they reached the main street, Caleb was half frozen and exhausted. The hotel was closest, but he headed instead for a small house with a sign out front. Dr. James Merritt, physician. He pounded on the door until it opened. A man in his 60s with white hair and spectacles peered out at him. "I need help," Caleb said. "This boy has fever, and I think the younger one's getting sick too." Dr. Merritt's eyes widened as he took in the group. Sweet mercy, bring them inside, quickly. The doctor's house was warm and smelled like medicine and wood smoke. He cleared space on a table and examined Noah while Caleb and the other children stood by, dripping melted snow onto the floor. Pneumonia, Dr. Merritt said after a long moment. He needs to be kept warm and given medicine every 4 hours. The other boy, he checked Samuel, who was coughing now. He's developing it too. They both need immediate care. Can you help them? Clara asked, her voice small. I can, child, but they'll need to stay here for at least a few days. All of us? Micah asked. Dr. Merritt looked at Caleb. I don't have room for 7 children, Mr. Turner, Caleb Turner. I can keep the sick ones here, but the others... Dr. Merritt glanced toward the window where the storm raged. In this weather, there aren't many options. What about the hotel? Clara suggested. Mrs. Patterson doesn't take in children, the doctor said gently, and the boarding house is full. Caleb's mind raced. He thought about riding out, leaving them here, letting the town figure it out. That's what he would have done a week ago, a day ago. But looking at these 7 faces, scared, cold, waiting for another adult to abandon them, he couldn't do it. There's got to be somewhere, he said. The church has a small room in back, Dr. Merritt offered. It's not much, but it's dry and there's a stove. We'll take it, Micah said quickly. We won't be trouble. Dr. Merritt nodded. I'll send word to Reverend Thomas, but first, let's get these boys settled. He looked at Caleb. I'll need your help moving them to the back room. Caleb helped carry Noah and Samuel to a small bedroom, where Dr. Merritt laid them side by side on a wide bed. He gave them medicine and covered them with thick quilts. They'll sleep now, the doctor said. The fever should break by tomorrow if the medicine does its work. He turned to the other children. The rest of you look half-starved. There's bread and cheese in the kitchen. Help yourselves. They didn't need to be told twice. Caleb watched them eat like they hadn't seen food in days. Maybe they hadn't. How long have they been on their own? Dr. Merritt asked quietly. 3 weeks, from what I gather, since their parents died. Someone should have stepped in. The doctor's voice was heavy with guilt. We all knew about them, but... He shook his head. This town has gotten good at looking the other way. Why? Dr. Merritt didn't answer for a long moment. Because Harlan Crow wants them, and nobody crosses Harlan Crow. The rancher, the landowner, the man who controls half the commerce in this county. Dr. Merritt's jaw tightened. He's claiming he wants to provide for them, give them structure and discipline. But I've treated men who've worked on his ranch. I've seen the bruises, the broken bones. He rules through fear. Then why doesn't someone stop him? Who? The sheriff's in his pocket. The judge owes him money. Most of the businesses in town depend on him for their livelihood. Dr. Merritt looked at the children who were still eating. Those kids would be free labor on his ranch, worked until they broke or ran away, and there's not a damn thing anyone can do about it. There's always something that can be done, Caleb said. You planning on staying, Mr. Turner? Caleb didn't answer. He couldn't, because he'd been planning to leave in the morning, to ride out and never look back. That had been the plan for 5 years. Keep moving. Don't get attached. Don't let anyone close enough to hurt you. But these children... I don't know, he said finally. Dr. Merritt nodded like he understood. Well, for tonight at least, they're safe. I'll send word to the church about the room. The storm continued through the evening. Caleb helped the doctor settle the children in the church's back room, a small space with a wood stove and enough floor space for them to lay out blankets. The older girl, Clara, took charge immediately, organizing their meager belongings and making sure the younger ones were warm. You'll be all right here tonight? Caleb asked Micah. The boy nodded. We've slept in worse places. He paused. Thank you. For the doctor, I mean. For Noah and Samuel. Thank the doc, not me. I just carried them there. Still, Micah's hard expression softened slightly. Most people wouldn't have done even that much. Caleb didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded and left. The walk back to the hotel felt longer than it should have. His room was cold, and he built up the fire before collapsing onto the bed. He lay there in the dark, listening to the storm, and thought about the question one of the younger boys had whispered while they were walking to the doctor's house. The child had thought Caleb couldn't hear him, but the words had carried in the wind. We're just waiting until we're not 7 anymore. Waiting until they were scattered, separated, lost to the system, or to men like Harland Crow. Waiting until there was nothing left of the family they'd been. Caleb rolled over and stared at the ceiling. He thought about Sarah, about the last thing she'd said to him before the fever took her. Promise me you'll keep living. Promise me you won't stop. He'd made that promise, but he'd been breaking it every day since. Maybe it was time to stop running. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving Silver Ridge buried under 2 feet of fresh snow. Caleb woke early and headed to the church. He found the children already awake, huddled around the stove. Micah looked up when he entered. How are Noah and Samuel? The boy asked immediately. I was going to check on them now. Want to come? Micah nodded and grabbed his coat. Too thin for this weather, Caleb noted. They walked to Dr. Merritt's house together, their breath fogging in the frigid air. The doctor met them at the door, looking tired but satisfied. The fevers broke just before dawn. They're weak, but they'll recover. Relief flooded Micah's face. Can we see them? Of course. The twins were awake, propped up on pillows. Noah's color was better and Samuel's cough had eased. The healthy twin, Owen, Caleb learned, sat between them on the bed. You feeling better? Micah asked Noah. Yeah. Noah's voice was hoarse. Dr. Merritt gave us medicine. It tastes awful. All medicine tastes awful, the doctor said with a slight smile. That's how you know it's working. You boys need to rest here another day or two, but you're on the mend. Caleb pulled Dr. Merritt aside. What do I owe you? Nothing. I took an oath to help people, and I haven't been living up to it lately. The doctor's expression was grim. I should have done something for these children weeks ago. You're doing something now. Only because you forced my hand. Dr. Merritt looked at the twins. What's your plan, Mr. Turner? I don't have one yet. Well, you'd better come up with something. Harland Crow doesn't like it when people interfere in his business. And he considers those children his business. As if summoned by the mention of his name, there was a sharp knock at the door. Dr. Merritt opened it to find Harland Crow standing on the porch, flanked by 2 of his ranch hands. James, Crow said pleasantly, I heard you had some unexpected patients. The Rowe children, Dr. Merritt confirmed. 2 of them needed treatment for pneumonia. Terrible situation. Crow's eyes swept past the doctor to where Caleb stood. Ah, Mr. Turner. Still in town, I see. Storm kept me here, Caleb said evenly. Indeed. Crow stepped inside without being invited. I understand you brought the children here. That was very kind of you. Very Christian. The way he said it made it sound like an accusation. They needed help. Of course they did, which is precisely why I've been working to arrange proper care for them. Crow moved into the room like he owned it. I've spoken with the territorial judge. Given the circumstances and my ability to provide for 7 children, I'll be petitioning for legal guardianship. No. Micah's voice was sharp. He'd come out of the bedroom, his face pale but determined. We don't want to go with you. Crow's smile didn't reach his eyes. You're 14 years old, son. You don't get to decide. These children need structure, discipline, a proper home. I can provide all of that. We have a home, Micah said. You have a burned-out shell of a cabin. Crow's voice hardened. And you've been living like animals in it. Is that what you want for your brothers and sisters? To freeze or starve because of your pride? Better than working ourselves to death on your ranch, Micah shot back. The room went very quiet. Crow's pleasant expression evaporated. You'd do well to watch your tongue, boy. I'm trying to help you. Leave them alone, Caleb said quietly. Crow turned to him. I beg your pardon? You heard me. Leave them alone. And who exactly are you to tell me what to do? Crow stepped closer. You're nobody. A drifter who'll be gone in a day or two. These children are my responsibility. They're nobody's responsibility but their own, Caleb interrupted, unless they choose otherwise. The law says different. Crow's voice was cold now. I'll have custody within the week, and when I do, anyone who's been interfering will find out what it costs to cross me in this town. He looked at Dr. Merritt. That includes you, James. The doctor's hand shook slightly, but his voice was steady. Get out of my house, Harland. Crow smiled. I'll see you at the hearing. 3 days from now. He tipped his hat mockingly and left, his men following. The door closed, and Dr. Merritt sagged against the wall. Lord help us, he meant every word. What hearing? Caleb asked. He's filed a petition with the territorial court. There'll be a formal hearing to determine custody. Dr. Merritt looked at Micah. Unless someone else steps forward to contest it, the judge will likely rule in Crow's favor. He has wealth, land, influence. And we have nothing, Micah finished bitterly. He looked at Caleb. You should go, Mr. Turner, before you get mixed up in this. Crow will make your life hell if you stay. Caleb thought about his horse in the stable, his bedroll already packed. He thought about a dozen other towns, 100 other roads, all of them leading away from here, away from responsibility, away from the possibility of caring and losing again. Then he thought about 7 children waiting in silence, hoping someone would choose them. I'm not going anywhere, he heard himself say. Micah stared at him. What? I said I'm not going anywhere. Caleb's voice was rough. Not until this is settled. Why? It was Clara who'd come to the bedroom doorway. Why would you do that for us? Caleb looked at her, at all of them, and saw the same question in their eyes. He didn't have a good answer. He only knew that for the first time in 5 years, the weight in his chest felt a little lighter. Because someone should, he said again. And it looks like I'm the only fool available. Dr. Merritt let out a long breath. You have no idea what you're getting into, Mr. Turner. Probably not, but I'm staying anyway. The children exchanged glances, and Caleb saw something flicker in their faces, something fragile and dangerous. Hope. He just prayed he wouldn't break it. The words hung in the air like smoke, heavy, impossible to take back. Caleb watched the children's faces shift from disbelief to something more dangerous, something that looked like trust beginning to take root. He wanted to tell them not to hope too much, not to count on him, but the damage was already done. Mr. Turner, Dr. Merritt said carefully, perhaps we should speak privately. Caleb nodded. They stepped into the doctor's small office, leaving Micah to watch over the others. Dr. Merritt closed the door and immediately began pacing. Do you have any idea what you've just committed to? The older man's voice was low but urgent. Harland Crow doesn't make idle threats. If you stand against him in this, he'll destroy you. I've been destroyed before, Caleb said quietly. I'm still here. This is different. Crow owns the bank, half the businesses in town, most of the land. He can make sure you never work again, never find shelter, never... Doc. Caleb held up a hand. I appreciate the warning, but I made my choice. Dr. Merritt stopped pacing and studied him. Why? You don't know these children. You owe them nothing. Caleb looked through the office window at the children gathered in the main room. Clara had her arm around the youngest girl, Emma, he'd learned her name was. Micah stood apart, arms crossed, trying to look strong for the others. Owen sat by his twin's bedside, holding Noah's hand. I had 3 children once, Caleb said. The words felt like broken glass in his throat. Lost them 5 years ago, along with my wife. Fever took all of them in less than a week. He paused, swallowing hard. I've spent every day since then trying to outrun that pain. Figured if I kept moving, kept my distance from everyone, it couldn't touch me again. And now? Now I'm tired of running. Caleb turned to face the doctor. I don't know if I can save those kids. I don't know if I'm strong enough or smart enough or anything enough. But I know what happens if nobody tries. I've seen it. Dr. Merritt's expression softened. You're a better man than most of us in this town, Caleb Turner. I'm just a man who's already lost everything, which means Crow can't take anything from me that matters. Perhaps, but he'll try. The doctor moved to his desk and pulled out a piece of paper. The hearing is set for Friday morning, 9 o'clock at the courthouse. You'll need to establish some kind of legal standing, show that you can provide for them, that you have means and character. I've got about $200 to my name and a horse. That's it. Then we'd better get creative. Dr. Merritt sat down heavily. And we'd better do it fast. They spent the next hour discussing options, each one seeming more impossible than the last. Caleb had no property, no permanent residence, no references in Silver Ridge. On paper, he was exactly what Crow's lawyers would paint him as, a vagrant with no business raising one child, let alone 7. There has to be something, Caleb muttered, frustration building. Some way to... A knock interrupted him. Micah stood in the doorway, his expression uncertain. The others are asking if we can go back to the church, the boy said. Noah and Samuel are sleeping, and you don't want to be charity cases any longer than necessary, Caleb finished. Micah's jaw tightened. We can take care of ourselves. I know you can. You've been doing it for weeks. Caleb stood. But there's a difference between surviving and living, son. And you've been barely surviving. It's all we've got. Not anymore. The words came out more forcefully than Caleb intended. He softened his tone. Look, I'm not trying to take over your family. I'm trying to help. Can you let me do that? Micah studied him for a long moment. For how long? What do you mean? How long until you decide it's too hard? Until you leave like everyone else? The boy's voice cracked slightly. Because we've had people promise to help before. They always leave. Caleb thought about lying, about making promises he wasn't sure he could keep. But these children deserve better than comfortable lies. I can't promise I won't fail you, he said honestly. I can't promise I'll be good at this or that I'll always know what to do. But I can promise I won't leave, not willingly, not while you still need me. Why should we believe you? Because I've got nothing else left to lose. Caleb held the boy's gaze. And because somebody has to stand up to Harlan Crow. Might as well be me. Something shifted in Micah's expression. Not quite trust, but maybe the beginning of it. He nodded slowly. The church room is cold, he said, and small. Then we'll find somewhere better. Caleb looked at Dr. Merritt. Is there any place in town that might work? Even temporarily? The doctor thought for a moment. There's an old grain mill on the east side of town. Been abandoned for years since the previous owner died. The building's sound, but it needs work. A lot of work. Who owns it now? The bank, I believe, which means Crow controls it, Caleb finished. He smiled grimly. Perfect. Where do I find the bank manager? Caleb, you can't be serious. Crow will never... He might, if I make it worth his while. Caleb was already moving toward the door. Watch the children for me, Doc. I'll be back within the hour. The Silver Ridge Bank was a solid brick building in the center of town, its windows frosted over from the cold. Caleb pushed through the heavy door and found himself in a room that smelled of leather and paper. A thin man with spectacles sat behind a desk, looking up in surprise. Can I help you? I want to rent the old grain mill, Caleb said without preamble. The one on the east side. The man blinked. I'm sorry, sir, but that property isn't available for How much? Excuse me? How much to rent it? Monthly rate. Caleb pulled out his money pouch. I can pay 3 months in advance. The bank manager's eyes widened slightly at the sight of the coins. Sir, I'm not authorized to make decisions about Mr. Crow's properties without his approval. Then get his approval. It's not that simple. The mill has been closed for I don't care how long it's been closed. I need a place to house 7 children, and that mill is big enough and solid enough to work. Name your price. The manager hesitated, clearly torn between the prospect of money and the fear of angering Crow. Finally, he said, $20 a month. It was highway robbery, and they both knew it. A place like that, in that condition, should rent for maybe $5. But Caleb didn't have time to negotiate. Done. I'll pay $60 for 3 months starting today. He counted out the coins onto the desk. I want the keys now and a receipt showing I've paid. The manager stared at the money like it might bite him. Mr. Crow will need to be informed. I'm sure he will be, but the transaction's legal, isn't it? The bank owns the property. I'm paying rent. Unless there's some law against that in Silver Ridge? No, but then write up the receipt. 5 minutes later, Caleb walked out of the bank with a set of keys and a piece of paper that gave him legal right to occupy the grain mill for the next 3 months. It wasn't much, but it was a start. It gave him standing, a place to house the children, proof that he had means to provide shelter. He went back to Dr. Merritt's house and found the children gathered in the main room. Micah looked up expectantly. Pack your things, Caleb said. We're moving. Moving where? Clara asked. You'll see. Come on. He led them through town, drawing stares from the few people brave enough to be out in the cold. The grain mill sat at the end of a snow-covered street, a 3-story building with faded paint and broken windows. It looked like it had seen better days, but the structure was solid. Thick walls, a sound roof, plenty of space. Caleb unlocked the heavy door and pushed it open. Inside was a vast, empty room, dusty and cold but dry. An old iron stove sat in one corner, and a stairway led to the upper floors. "This is it?" Micah said, his voice echoing in the empty space. "For now." Caleb surveyed the room, already making mental calculations. "It needs work, but it's better than that cabin. We've got walls, a roof, and that stove. First thing we do is get a fire going." The children spread out, exploring. Emma discovered a small side room that might have been an office. Owen found a storage closet still stocked with old burlap sacks. Even Micah's skeptical expression softened slightly as he took in the space. "How did you get this place?" Clara asked. "Rented it from the bank. Paid 3 months up front." "That must have cost—" She stopped, her eyes widening. "You spent your money on us?" "It's just money." Caleb started gathering wood from a pile near the stove. "Help me get this fire started, then we'll figure out what else we need." They worked together, and within an hour, heat was spreading through the main room. Caleb sent Micah and Clara to the general store with a list and most of his remaining cash: blankets, food, lamp oil, soap. The younger children swept the floor and cleared out the debris. It felt strange working alongside them. Caleb had spent 5 years avoiding exactly this kind of connection, this sense of purpose and belonging. But as he watched Emma carefully arranging their few possessions in the side room, as he listened to Owen chattering excitedly about the possibilities of the upper floors, something in his chest loosened. Maybe this was what healing felt like. Micah and Clara returned an hour later, their arms full of supplies. But they weren't alone. A woman in her 30s followed them in, carrying a basket covered with a cloth. "Mr. Turner?" She had kind eyes and an uncertain smile. "I'm Elizabeth Hayes. I teach at the school here. I heard about what you're doing for the Rowe children." Caleb straightened. News travels fast. "It's a small town." She set the basket down. "I brought some food, bread, butter, preserves, and I wanted to offer my help. If there's anything you need—" "Why?" The question came out harsher than Caleb intended. "No one's lifted a finger for these kids in weeks. Why now?" Elizabeth's smile faded. "Because we were afraid. Because Harlan Crow has this town in his grip, and standing against him costs more than most people are willing to pay." She met his gaze steadily. "But you're standing anyway, and maybe that's enough to remind the rest of us what we should have been doing all along." Caleb felt some of his anger drain away. "I'm not a hero, Miss Hayes. You're a man who saw children in need and didn't look away. In a town like this, that makes you rare." She glanced at the children, who were watching the exchange with wide eyes. "The schoolhouse is closed for winter, but I still have books, slates, primers. I could bring them by tomorrow, start lessons if you'd like." "We'd like that very much," Clara said quickly, before Caleb could respond. Elizabeth smiled. "Then I'll be here at 9 o'clock. And Mr. Turner?" She paused at the door. "You're not alone in this. There are others who want to help. We've just been waiting for someone brave enough to go first." After she left, Micah turned to Caleb. "Do you believe her?" "I don't know, but we'll find out soon enough." That night, they spread blankets on the floor of the main room, close to the stove. Caleb took the first watch, feeding the fire and listening to the children's breathing slow as they fell asleep one by one. Emma curled against Clara. Owen sprawled across his blanket. Lily, the quiet 7-year-old who rarely spoke, clutched a small wooden horse that had somehow survived the fire. Only Micah stayed awake, sitting with his back against the wall. "You should sleep," Caleb said quietly. "Can't." The boy's voice was tight. "Every time I close my eyes, I see the fire. I see my parents." Caleb moved closer, settling beside him. "I know." "How could you know?" "Because I see my family every time I close my eyes, too." Caleb stared at the stove's glowing embers. "My wife, Sarah. My daughter, Margaret. My son, Thomas. My baby girl, Anna. They died 5 years ago, all in the same week. Fever. Micah was quiet for a long moment. Does it get easier? No, but you learn to carry it. Caleb looked at the sleeping children. And you find new reasons to keep going. Is that what we are? Your new reason? Maybe. Or maybe you're giving me back something I thought I'd lost forever. Caleb paused. The ability to care about tomorrow. Micah nodded slowly. I'm scared, he admitted. Scared we'll end up with Crow. Scared you'll change your mind. Scared that even if you don't, the judge won't care. Fear's natural, but we can't let it win. How do we fight someone like Crow? He has everything, money, power, the law on his side. We fight with the truth, Caleb said, and we find people willing to speak it. The next morning brought Elizabeth Hayes, true to her word, along with a wagon full of books and school supplies. She also brought Daniel Marsh, the young man from the hotel, who'd volunteered to help repair the mill's broken windows. Figure you could use an extra set of hands, Daniel said, setting down a box of glass panes. I'm pretty handy with carpentry. I appreciate that, Caleb said. But you know what this means, don't you? Helping us means crossing Crow. Daniel's expression hardened. My father worked on Crow's ranch, died there when I was 12. Thrown from a horse Crow knew was dangerous. Crow paid for the funeral, then told my mother we should be grateful for his generosity. He picked up a hammer. I've been waiting a long time to stand against that man. By noon, the mill was transformed. The windows were repaired, letting in weak winter sunlight. Elizabeth had set up a makeshift classroom in the side room, and the younger children were bent over slates, practicing their letters. Daniel had built a table from scrap wood, and Clara was preparing a simple lunch from the supplies they'd bought. Dr. Merritt arrived around 1 o'clock, bringing Noah and Samuel with him. The boys are well enough to rejoin their siblings, the doctor announced, though they'll need to take it easy for a few more days. The reunion was joyful. Owen practically tackled Noah with a hug, and even Micah's stern expression softened as he saw his younger brothers looking healthy again. But Dr. Merritt pulled Caleb aside, his face grave. Crow knows about the mill. He came to my office this morning demanding to know what you're planning. What did you tell him? That I'm a doctor, not a mind reader. Dr. Merritt glanced at the children. But he's angry, Caleb, more than I've seen him. He views this as a personal challenge to his authority. Good. Let him be angry. You don't understand. When Harlan Crow gets angry, people get hurt. As if to prove the doctor's point, the mill's door slammed open and 3 men walked in. Caleb recognized Crow's ranch hands from the hotel. The one in front was tall and thick-shouldered, with a scar across his cheek. You Turner? The man growled. Caleb stepped between the men and the children. I am. Mr. Crow sent us with a message. You are to vacate this property immediately. The rental agreement is void. I have a receipt that says otherwise. Don't care what you have. You're leaving now. The man cracked his knuckles. We can do this easy or hard. Your choice. Caleb felt his pulse quicken, that old familiar rush of adrenaline. He'd been in enough fights to know when violence was coming, and it was coming now. But he had to stay calm, had to think about the children watching. I'm not going anywhere, he said evenly. I paid my rent. This is legal. Legal. The ranch hand spat on the floor. You think the law matters in Silver Ridge? Crow is the law. And he says you're done here. Then let him come tell me himself. The man's face darkened. He took a step forward and stopped as Elizabeth Hayes stepped up beside Caleb. That's enough, Wade, she said firmly. You've delivered your message. Now leave. Wade laughed. This ain't your business, school teacher. These children are my students. That makes it my business. Elizabeth's voice didn't waver. And I'm not the only one watching. She gestured to the door, where a small crowd had gathered, townspeople drawn by the commotion. Caleb recognized several faces from the general store, the church, the streets. They weren't interfering, but they were witnessing. Wade looked at the crowd, then back at Caleb. This isn't over. I expect it's not, Caleb said, but it's over for today. The ranch hands left, and the crowd slowly dispersed. Elizabeth let out a shaky breath. That was foolish of me, she said, but I couldn't just stand there. Thank you, Caleb said quietly. She smiled. We're not all cowards in this town. Some of us just needed a reminder of what courage looks like. That evening, after the children were settled and Daniel had gone home, Caleb stood outside the mill watching the stars emerge. The cold bit through his coat, but he didn't go inside. He needed to think, to plan. Footsteps crunched in the snow behind him. Micah. Couldn't sleep again, Caleb asked. Kept thinking about what that man said, about Crow being the law. Micah's voice was tight with frustration. How do we fight that? We don't fight it alone. Caleb turned to face him. We find allies. People who've been hurt by Crow, people who are tired of living in fear. We build something he can't tear down with money or threats. Like what? Like community. Like people standing together. Caleb paused. Your parents, what were they like? Micah looked surprised by the question. My father was a carpenter. My mother took in sewing. They weren't rich, but they were good people. They helped their neighbors, went to church, taught us to be kind. His voice cracked. They deserved better than burning to death in their own home. What happened that night? I don't know exactly. I was out checking the animals. When I came back, the cabin was on fire. I got the others out, but I couldn't reach my parents. The smoke was too thick. Micah wiped at his eyes angrily. They died because our stove was old and cracked. We'd been saving to replace it, but money was tight, Caleb finished gently. If we'd had more money, if someone had helped us sooner, they'd still be alive. The boy's hands clenched into fists. That's why I can't let us end up with Crow. My parents would never have wanted that. Then we'll make sure it doesn't happen. Caleb put a hand on Micah's shoulder. I promise you, son, we'll fight this with everything we have. The next 2 days passed in a blur of activity. More townspeople came forward, bringing supplies, offering help. The stable owner, a gruff man named Jack Porter, donated hay and blankets. The seamstress, Mrs. Chen, brought clothes she'd altered to fit the children. Even Reverend Thomas arrived with a wagon full of firewood. I should have done this weeks ago, the Reverend said, his face lined with shame. I knew those children needed help, and I let fear stop me. You're here now, Caleb said. That's what matters. But not everyone was supportive. Several businesses refused to serve Caleb, claiming they were already committed to Crow. The sheriff, a tired-looking man named Morrison, stopped by the mill to warn him. I'm not saying you're wrong to help those kids, Morrison said, but you're making powerful enemies. If things get ugly, I can't promise I'll be able to protect you. I'm not asking you to. Just be careful. The sheriff glanced at the children. Crow doesn't lose gracefully. The hearing was scheduled for Friday morning. Thursday evening, Dr. Merritt gathered everyone who'd been helping, Elizabeth, Daniel, Jack Porter, Mrs. Chen, Reverend Thomas, and a few others, in the mill's main room. The children were upstairs, supposedly asleep, but Caleb suspected at least Micah was listening. Tomorrow's going to be difficult, Dr. Merritt began. Crow will have lawyers, witnesses, documentation. We need to present our case clearly and convincingly. What case do we have? Jack Porter asked bluntly. No offense to Caleb, but on paper, he's got nothing. No property, no steady income, no ties to this community. He has us, Elizabeth said. He has people willing to stand with him. Will that be enough? Mrs. Chen asked quietly. No one had an answer. Caleb stood. Here's what I know. Those children upstairs have been through hell. They've lost their parents, their home, their security. They've been cold and hungry and scared, and not one person in this town did a damn thing about it until 3 days ago. His voice rose. Maybe I'm not the perfect guardian. Maybe I don't have the money or the fancy house or the respectability that Harlan Crow has, but I've got something he doesn't. What's that? Daniel asked. I actually care about those kids, not as labor, not as a way to look generous, as human beings who deserve love and safety. Caleb looked around the room. Tomorrow, we tell the truth. We tell it loud and clear, and we hope to heaven the judge is listening. After the others left, Caleb found Micah sitting on the stairs. You heard all that? Caleb asked. Most of it. The boy stood. Do you really think we have a chance? I think we have to try. That's all we can do. Micah nodded. Then, hesitantly, he held out his hand. Caleb shook it, feeling the boy's grip, strong, determined, still shaking slightly with fear. "Thank you," Micah said quietly, "for not giving up on us. Thank you for giving me a reason not to." That night, Caleb lay awake on his bedroll, listening to the wind outside. Tomorrow would decide everything. Either they'd walk out of that courthouse as a family, however uncertain and cobbled together, or Harlan Crow would take these children and scatter them to the winds. Caleb thought about Sarah, about the last night they'd spent together before the fever hit. She'd been tired, worried about the children's coughs, but still hopeful, still believing tomorrow would be better. "I'm trying, Sarah," he whispered into the darkness. "I'm trying to keep that promise, to keep living, to keep hoping." The fire crackled in the stove. Somewhere upstairs, one of the children coughed softly. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering Silver Ridge in fresh white silence. And in the distance, barely audible over the wind, the courthouse bell tolled midnight. Dawn broke cold and gray over Silver Ridge, the kind of morning that felt like the sky itself was holding its breath. Caleb woke to find the children already stirring, their movements quiet and tense. Claire was braiding Lily's hair with shaking fingers. Owen sat beside Noah, both twins staring at nothing. Even Emma, usually so full of quiet energy, sat motionless near the stove. They all knew what today meant. "Eat something," Caleb said, ladling out portions of the porridge Clara had made. "All of you." "I'm not hungry," Micah muttered. "I didn't ask if you were hungry. I said eat." Caleb's tone left no room for argument. "You'll need your strength today." Elizabeth arrived at 7 with fresh bread and a determined expression. She'd brought her Sunday dress and helped Clara change into a clean frock that Mrs. Chen had altered. Daniel showed up minutes later, his hair slicked back, wearing what looked like his only good shirt. "Figured you could use some support," he said simply. By 8:30, they were ready. The children looked small and scared in their clean clothes, huddled together like they were bracing against a storm. Caleb studied each face, committing them to memory, just in case this was the last morning they'd all be together. "Listen to me," he said, kneeling so he was at eye level with the youngest ones. "No matter what happens in that courthouse, I want you to remember something. You are not alone. You are not unwanted, and you are not going to Harlan Crow's ranch if I have anything to say about it." "But what if the judge doesn't listen?" Emma whispered. "Then we'll make him listen." Caleb looked at Micah. "You ready?" The boy's jaw was set, his eyes hard. "Ready." The courthouse was an imposing stone building at the north end of town, its steps already crowded with people. Caleb recognized some of them, townspeople who'd helped over the past few days. But there were others too, ranch hands and businessmen who worked for Crow, their expressions hostile. Harlan Crow stood at the top of the steps, flanked by 2 men in expensive suits. His smile was confident, predatory. "Mr. Turner," he called out pleasantly, "I'm surprised you actually came. I thought you might have the good sense to ride out of town last night." "I don't run from bullies," Caleb said evenly. Crow's smile didn't waver. "Bully, that's a strong word. I prefer to think of myself as a concerned citizen trying to help 7 orphan children. By forcing them into servitude on your ranch? By providing them with structure, education, and opportunity." Crow descended a few steps, his voice carrying to the gathered crowd. "Something a drifter with no home and no prospects can hardly offer." Before Caleb could respond, the courthouse doors opened and a clerk stepped out. "The territorial judge is ready," he announced. "All parties involved in the Roe custody case, please enter." The courtroom was smaller than Caleb expected, with wooden benches and a raised platform where the judge would sit. The children filed in quietly, taking seats in the front row. Dr. Merritt, Elizabeth, Daniel, and the others who'd come to support them filled the benches behind. Crow's people took the opposite side, creating a clear divide down the middle of the room. Judge Harold Brennan entered through a side door, a heavy-set man in his 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He settled into his chair and surveyed the courtroom. "This is a custody hearing for the 7 minor children of William and Catherine Roe, deceased," he began, his voice formal. "Mr. Harlan Crow has petitioned for legal guardianship. Is Mr. Crow present?" "I am, Your Honor." Crow stood, every inch the respectable rancher. "And I understand there is a competing interest?" The judge's gaze landed on Caleb. Yes, Your Honor, my name is Caleb Turner. I'm requesting custody of the Rowe children. On what grounds, Mr. Turner? Caleb stood, acutely aware of every eye in the room on him. On the grounds that they deserve better than to be worked like animals on a ranch. On the grounds that I can provide them with care and safety. And on the grounds that they don't want to go with Mr. Crow. What children want and what's best for them are often two different things, Judge Brennan said. Mr. Crow's petition will be heard first. Proceed. One of Crow's lawyers, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, stood and began presenting their case. He spoke eloquently about Crow's wealth, his standing in the community, his large ranch with ample room for children. He produced documents showing Crow's financial stability, letters of recommendation from prominent citizens, even architectural plans for a new dormitory that would house the children. Mr. Crow has generously offered to provide these orphans with everything they need, the lawyer concluded. Education, shelter, food, clothing, and most importantly, discipline and moral guidance. He asks for nothing in return except the satisfaction of knowing he's helped those less fortunate. It was a compelling presentation, Caleb had to admit. On paper, Crow looked like a saint. Then it was time for witnesses. Crow's foreman took the stand first, a thick-necked man named Dutch, who spoke in careful, rehearsed sentences about what a fair and generous employer Crow was. Never seen him mistreat a soul, Dutch said. He's firm, sure, but that's what boys need, especially wild ones with no parents to guide them. The banker testified next, describing Crow's financial standing and his history of charitable contributions to the town. The Reverend, looking uncomfortable but speaking anyway, mentioned Crow's regular attendance at church and his donations to various causes. Each witness built the image of a pillar of the community, a man of means and morality perfectly suited to raise 7 orphan children. Then Crow himself took the stand. Your Honor, he began, his voice measured and sincere, I won't pretend this is entirely selfless. I'm getting older, and I have no children of my own. The thought of 7 young people growing up without guidance, without opportunity, troubles me deeply. He paused, as if overcome with emotion. I knew their father, William Rowe. He was a good man, a hard worker. When I heard about the fire, about these children left alone, I felt it was my duty to step in. And what would life be like for these children on your ranch? Judge Brennan asked. They would work, yes, but so do all children on a ranch. It builds character, teaches responsibility. They'd attend school when weather permits, have warm beds, 3 meals a day. The older boys would learn ranching, a valuable trade. The girls would learn domestic skills. Crow's gaze swept to the children. I would treat them as if they were my own. That last statement made Caleb's blood boil, but he forced himself to stay silent. Mr. Turner, Judge Brennan said, you may present your case. Caleb stood, suddenly aware he had no lawyer, no rehearsed speech, no impressive documents. He had only the truth. Your Honor, I'm not a rich man. I don't own land or have letters from important people. What I have is a rented mill that I'm turning into a home, enough money to feed these children for a few months, and a promise I made to them, that I wouldn't abandon them like everyone else has. That's admirable, Mr. Turner, but promises don't provide food or shelter. No, sir, they don't. But I've got people willing to help. Caleb gestured to the benches behind him. Dr. Merritt has agreed to provide medical care. Miss Hayes is teaching the children for free. Folks in town have donated supplies, firewood, clothes. We're building something together, a community that actually cares about these kids. Judge Brennan leaned forward. And what happens when your money runs out? When winter gets harder and those donations dry up? What then? Then I'll find work. I'm a good hand with horses, decent at carpentry. I'll do whatever it takes. That's a pretty sentiment, but this court deals in facts, not sentiments. The judge's expression was stern. Do you have any witnesses to support your petition? I do, Your Honor. Dr. Merritt stood and approached the stand. After being sworn in, he spoke clearly and firmly. I've been a doctor in Silver Ridge for 30 years. In that time, I've treated dozens of men who've worked on Harlan Crow's ranch. I've set broken bones, stitched up cuts, treated illnesses that went untreated for far too long because workers were afraid to miss a day's wages. He pulled a ledger from his coat. I've kept records. 2 men died from injuries sustained on that ranch in the past 5 years alone. others left with permanent disabilities. Crow's lawyer shot to his feet. "Objection! Dr. Merritt is making unfounded accusations." "I have documentation," Dr. Merritt interrupted, holding up the ledger. "Every injury, every illness, every suspicious bruise, this is fact, not accusation." Judge Brennan studied the doctor for a long moment. "I'll allow it. Continue." "The truth is, Your Honor, Harlan Crow runs his ranch like a dictator runs his country, through fear and intimidation. Those children wouldn't be raised. They'd be broken." Dr. Merritt's voice shook with suppressed anger. "I've stayed silent too long about what goes on at that ranch. I won't stay silent anymore." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Crow's face darkened, but he kept his composure. Elizabeth testified next, describing how the children had been living in a collapsed cabin for weeks, while the town looked the other way. Daniel spoke about his father's death on Crow's ranch, his voice breaking as he described finding his father's body. Then Jack Porter, the stable owner, took the stand. "I worked for Crow for 3 years," he said, his weathered hands gripping the rail. "Left 5 years ago after I saw him beat a 14-year-old boy bloody for dropping a tool. That boy's name was Matthew Chen. He's gone now, ran away and never came back. His mother still cries for him." Mrs. Chen, the seamstress, was sitting in the back row. At the mention of her son's name, she stood slowly. "Your Honor," she said, her voice trembling, "may I speak?" Judge Brennan nodded. "Come forward, Mrs. Chen." She approached the stand, small and dignified despite her shaking hands. After being sworn in, she looked directly at Crow. "My son Matthew worked on your ranch when he was 14. You promised me he'd learn a trade, that he'd be safe." Her voice grew stronger. "He came home with bruises. When I asked, he wouldn't say where they came from. Then one day, he didn't come home at all. I went to your ranch, and you told me he'd run off, that he was ungrateful and lazy." Tears streamed down her face. "I haven't seen my boy in 5 years. 5 years, and I know in my heart that whatever happened to him, it's because of what he endured on your ranch." The courtroom was silent except for Mrs. Chen's quiet weeping. Crow's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, this is hearsay and speculation. Mrs. Chen has no proof." "I have proof," a voice called from the back of the courtroom. Everyone turned. A young man stood in the doorway, rail thin, with a scar across his forehead, but unmistakably Mrs. Chen's son. "Matthew?" Mrs. Chen gasped. The young man walked down the aisle, and his mother rushed to him, sobbing. Judge Brennan banged his gavel for order. "Young man, state your name for the record," the judge commanded. "Matthew Chen, Your Honor. I heard there was a hearing about Mr. Crow taking in children. I couldn't let that happen without speaking up." "Where have you been for 5 years?" "Running, hiding, working odd jobs in other towns." Matthew's eyes were hollow. "I left Silver Ridge because I was afraid if I stayed, Mr. Crow would kill me." "That's absurd!" Crow exploded, standing. "Your Honor, this boy is clearly disturbed." "Sit down, Mr. Crow." Judge Brennan's voice was ice. "Matthew Chen, you may speak." Matthew described 3 years of working on Crow's ranch, of being beaten for minor mistakes, of going hungry as punishment, of watching other boys suffer the same treatment. He rolled up his sleeve to show scars that crisscrossed his forearm. "He did this with a branding iron," Matthew said quietly. "Said it would teach me not to let the cattle stray. I was 15 years old." The courtroom exploded. Crow's supporters were shouting denials, while others called for his arrest. Judge Brennan banged his gavel repeatedly, calling for order. Through the chaos, Caleb watched the children. They sat perfectly still, holding hands, their faces pale but determined. Finally, the judge restored order. "Is there anything else, Mr. Turner?" "Yes, Your Honor. I'd like the children to speak for themselves." Judge Brennan hesitated. "They're minors, their testimony. They're the ones whose lives will be decided here today," Caleb interrupted. "Don't they deserve to be heard?" After a long moment, the judge nodded. "Very well. Who wishes to speak?" Clara stood first, her hands clasped in front of her. She approached the stand with quiet dignity. "My name is Clara Rowe. I'm 12 years old. After our parents died, people in town brought us food sometimes, but nobody offered to take us in. Not until Mr. Turner." Her voice steadied. "He didn't know us. He didn't owe us anything. But he saw that we needed help, and he helped, not because he wanted something from us, but because it was the right thing to do. And what about Mr. Crow? Judge Brennan asked gently. He's offering you a home as well. Mr. Crow wants workers, not children. I can see it in his eyes when he looks at us. We're not people to him. We're labor. Clara's hands tightened. Mr. Turner looks at us like we matter. Micah went next. He stood at the front of the courtroom, facing the judge with his shoulders back. Your Honor, I'm the oldest. It's been my job to protect my brothers and sisters since our parents died. For weeks I've been trying to figure out how to keep us together, how to keep us safe. His voice cracked slightly. Then Mr. Turner showed up. He could have ridden right past our cabin. Most people did, but he stopped. He got Noah and Samuel to the doctor. He found us a place to stay. He spent his own money on us, money he probably needed. Micah looked at Crow. That man has never done anything without expecting something in return. Mr. Turner gave without asking for anything. What if Mr. Turner can't provide for you long term? The judge asked. What if the money runs out and the support fades? Then we'll figure it out together, Micah said firmly, because that's what families do. Owen spoke next, his child's voice clear in the quiet courtroom. Mr. Turner carried my brother through a snowstorm to save his life. Mr. Crow wouldn't even give us firewood. Lily, who rarely spoke, whispered into the silent room. He makes me feel safe. Then Emma, the youngest, climbed onto the witness stand. Her feet didn't touch the ground. She looked at Judge Brennan with huge, solemn eyes. Are you going to make us go with the scary man? She asked. Mr. Crow isn't, the judge began. Yes, he is. I can tell. He smiles, but his eyes are mean. Emma clutched her wooden horse. Mr. Turner's eyes are sad sometimes, but they're kind. I want to stay with him. Judge Brennan removed his spectacles and rubbed his eyes. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Clara stood again. Your Honor, may I say one more thing? Go ahead, child. We're not asking for charity. We're not asking to be rescued. We're just asking for a chance to be a family, even if it's not the traditional kind. A chance to be with someone who actually wants us. Her voice broke. We've been waiting so long for someone to want us. The judge looked at Crow, then at Caleb, then at the 7 children sitting together. This court will take a 30-minute recess while I consider the evidence presented, he said finally. Everyone remain nearby. The courtroom emptied into the cold morning air. Caleb stood with the children, not knowing what to say. Dr. Merritt approached, his face grave. That could have gone either way, the doctor said quietly. The children's testimony was powerful, but Crow still has influence. I know. Elizabeth joined them, her arm around Clara. Whatever happens, you did the right thing, Caleb. You gave them hope. Hope's not enough if they end up on Crow's ranch. Then we have faith it won't come to that. The minutes crawled by. Caleb watched the children, some crying quietly, others staring at nothing, all of them holding on to each other like they were afraid they'd be ripped apart at any moment. Micah stood beside Caleb, his jaw clenched so tight it must have hurt. If the judge rules for Crow, the boy said quietly, I'm taking the others and running. Micah, I mean it. I'll gather them up and we'll disappear. Head west maybe, or north into the mountains. We'll survive somehow. You'd be fugitives. They'd hunt you down. Better that than what Crow has planned. Micah looked up at him. I won't let him have them, Mr. Turner. I won't. Before Caleb could respond, the courthouse doors opened. The clerk called them back inside. Judge Brennan sat at his bench, his expression unreadable. The courtroom filled quickly, tension thick enough to choke on. Caleb's heart hammered as he took his seat. The children pressed close beside him. This has been one of the most difficult decisions I've faced in my 20 years on the bench, Judge Brennan began. On one hand, we have a man of considerable means and standing offering to provide for 7 orphan children. On the other, we have a stranger with limited resources but considerable heart. He paused. The law requires me to consider what's in the best interest of the children. For too long, I've defined best interest in purely material terms. Who can provide the most food, the best shelter, the finest clothes? Crow leaned back in his chair, a satisfied smile playing at his lips. But these children have reminded me, the judge continued, that best interest must also account for safety, for dignity, for the right to be treated as human beings rather than property. His voice hardened. The testimony I heard today about conditions on Mr. Crow's ranch deeply troubles me. While not all of it can be verified immediately, there is enough corroboration to give me serious pause. Crow's smile vanished. Furthermore, Judge Brennan said, the children themselves have made their wishes abundantly clear. And while children don't always know what's best for them, in this case, their instincts align with the evidence presented. Caleb's breath caught. Therefore, I am denying Mr. Crow's petition for guardianship. The judge's gavel came down. Temporary custody of the 7 Rowe children is hereby granted to Caleb Turner, pending a review in 6 months to ensure adequate care is being provided. Additionally, I am ordering a full investigation into the working conditions at the Triple C Ranch. The courtroom erupted. Crow shot to his feet, his face purple with rage. This is an outrage. That man has nothing. He can't possibly— Mr. Crow, you will sit down and be silent, or I will hold you in contempt. Judge Brennan's voice cracked like a whip. This hearing is concluded. Caleb couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The children around him were crying, clinging to each other. Clara threw her arms around him, sobbing into his coat. Emma grabbed his hand. Owen and Noah were cheering. Even Micah's eyes were wet as he gripped Caleb's shoulder. You did it, the boy whispered. You actually did it. Dr. Merritt was shaking his hand. Elizabeth was crying. Daniel was pounding him on the back. The courtroom was chaos, but all Caleb could focus on was the 7 faces looking up at him with something he hadn't seen before. Complete, unguarded trust. Crow stormed out of the courtroom, his lawyers scrambling after him. At the door, he turned back, his eyes locking onto Caleb's. This isn't over, he said, his voice low and deadly. Not by a long shot. Then he was gone, and the celebration continued. But Caleb felt a chill run down his spine. Men like Harlan Crow didn't lose gracefully. They retaliated. And something told him the real fight was just beginning. The walk back to the mill should have been triumphant, but Caleb couldn't shake the weight of Crow's final words. The children chattered excitedly around him, their relief palpable, but he remained quiet, scanning the streets for any sign of trouble. They were halfway home when the first snowflake fell. Within minutes, it was a full blizzard. Wind howling, snow driving horizontal, visibility dropping to almost nothing. The children huddled closer, and Caleb pulled Emma up into his arms. Stay together, he shouted over the wind. Hold hands and don't let go. They stumbled through the whiteout, Caleb navigating by memory and instinct. The mill couldn't be more than 2 blocks away, but in this storm, they might as well have been miles from shelter. Then he realized someone was missing. Where's Micah? He yelled. Claire's face went white. He was right behind me. Caleb's heart stopped. He handed Emma to Clara. Get everyone to the mill. Stay there until I come back. But now, Clara. He turned and ran back into the storm, calling Micah's name. The wind tore the words from his mouth. Snow stung his face, his hands already going numb despite his gloves. And somewhere in the screaming white chaos, Micah was alone. The blizzard swallowed Caleb whole. Within seconds, he couldn't see more than a few feet ahead, the world reduced to howling wind and driving snow. His lungs burned with cold air as he shouted Micah's name again and again, knowing the storm would steal every word. He retraced their steps, or tried to, his boots slipping on ice he couldn't see. Buildings materialized out of the white like ghosts, unfamiliar and distorted. Panic clawed at his chest, not for himself, but for a 14-year-old boy alone in this killing cold. Micah! His voice was raw. Micah, where are you? Nothing but wind answered. Caleb pushed forward, his face numb, ice forming in his beard. He thought about turning back, about getting help, but every second counted. A person could freeze to death in minutes in a storm like this. He'd seen it happen before, bodies found curled against fence posts or building walls, so close to safety, but not close enough. He rounded what he thought was the corner near the general store and nearly fell over a dark shape huddled against a stone wall. Micah sat with his knees pulled to his chest, his coat already white with accumulated snow. Micah! Caleb dropped to his knees beside the boy. Can you hear me? The boy's eyes were open but unfocused, his lips blue. He was shaking violently. I'm sorry, Micah mumbled, his words slurred. I couldn't. I couldn't go back, not yet. What are you talking about? Caleb pulled off his own coat and wrapped it around the boy's shoulders. We have to move, now. I ran. Micah's voice broke. Just like I always do. Every time something gets hard, every time I'm scared, I run. I ran from the cabin fire. I've been running ever since. You didn't run from anything. You're 14 years old and you've been carrying the weight of the world. Caleb grabbed the boy's face, forcing him to focus. But you can't run now. Your brothers and sisters are waiting. They need you. What if I fail them? What if I'm not strong enough? Then you fail, and you get back up and try again. Caleb pulled Micah to his feet, the boy's legs buckling. But you don't get to give up. You don't get to freeze to death against a wall because you're scared. You understand me? Micah nodded weakly. Caleb hauled the boy's arm over his shoulder and started walking. The wind pushed against them like a living thing, trying to drive them back. Caleb had no idea which direction they were going. Everything looked the same, a featureless white hell. His fingers were going numb, his feet like blocks of ice. He thought about Sarah, about the promise he'd made, about the graves he'd run from for 5 years, about 7 children who'd just started to believe someone might actually stay. We're not dying today, he said through gritted teeth. You hear me, Micah? We're going to make it back. I can't feel my hands, Micah whispered. That's all right. I can feel mine enough for both of us. Caleb tightened his grip. Tell me about your parents. What were they like? What? Your parents. Talk to me. Keep yourself awake. Micah's words came slowly, fighting through the cold and exhaustion. My father, he used to sing. Terrible voice, but he'd sing anyway while he worked. Drove my mother crazy. A ghost of a smile crossed his blue lips. She'd throw things at him, but she was always smiling. What else? He taught me carpentry, said every man should know how to build things with his hands, said it was how you left your mark on the world. Micah stumbled, and Caleb caught him. I wanted to be just like him. You are like him. You've been building a family, holding them together when everything else fell apart. Caleb squinted through the snow, desperate for any landmark. That's the hardest thing anyone can build. A shape emerged from the white. The corner of a building Caleb recognized. The hotel. They were close. Almost there, he said. Stay with me. They staggered forward, and suddenly they weren't alone. Daniel appeared out of the storm, followed by Jack Porter and Dr. Merritt, all of them with ropes tied around their waists. Thank heaven, Dr. Merritt gasped. We were forming a search party. The children said you'd gone after Micah. He's half frozen, Caleb said. We need to get him warm. They followed the rope back to the mill, where the children waited in terrified silence. Clara screamed when she saw Micah, rushing forward to help Dr. Merritt lay him near the stove. The doctor worked quickly, removing the boy's wet clothes and wrapping him in blankets. His core temperatures dropped dangerously low, Dr. Merritt said. We need to warm him gradually. Hot water bottles, warm liquids when he can drink. Claire and Elizabeth moved with practiced efficiency, heating water and preparing blankets. Caleb stood by, useless and shaking, his own body starting to realize how cold he was. Sit down before you fall down, Dr. Merritt ordered, turning his attention to Caleb. You're not much better off than the boy. Caleb collapsed onto a chair, and suddenly Owen was there with a blanket. Emma brought him hot coffee with shaking hands. Noah sat at his feet, just being close. Is Micah going to be okay? Clara asked, her voice small. I think so, Dr. Merritt said. But it was close. Too close. The storm raged outside for hours. They all huddled in the main room, feeding the stove and watching over Micah, who drifted in and out of consciousness. Caleb sat beside the boy, his hand on Micah's shoulder, feeling the slow return of warmth to the child's body. Around midnight, Micah's eyes opened fully. He looked at Caleb, then at his siblings gathered around. I'm sorry, he whispered. Don't be, Clara said, gripping his hand. Just don't ever do that again. I won't. Micah's gaze found Caleb's. You came after me, even in that storm. Of course I did. Why? You could have died. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Because that's what family does. We don't leave people behind, not anymore. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving Silver Ridge buried under 3 feet of snow. The world was white and silent, beautiful and deadly. Caleb woke to find all 7 children sleeping around him, some on blankets, others curled against his chair. Even Micah had moved closer during the night. He sat very still, not wanting to wake them, and felt something shift in his chest. For 5 years, he'd been hollow, going through the motions of living without really being alive. But looking at these children, listening to their quiet breathing, he felt that hollow place starting to fill. It hurt. It terrified him. But it also felt like coming home. Dr. Merritt arrived mid-morning with news. The roads are impassable. Nothing's moving in or out of town for at least a few days. That might be a blessing, Caleb said quietly. Gives us time before Crow makes his next move. You think he will? I know he will. Men like that don't accept defeat. Caleb looked at the sleeping children. We need to be ready. But ready for what, he didn't know. The answer came 3 days later when the roads finally cleared and a rider arrived from the territorial capital. He delivered a summons to Caleb's hand. What is it? Elizabeth asked. Caleb read the document, his jaw tightening. Crow's appealing the custody decision. He's claiming Judge Brennan was biased, that new evidence has come to light questioning my character and ability to provide for the children. What new evidence? Dr. Merritt demanded. Doesn't say. But the appeal hearing is scheduled for next month. Caleb crumpled the paper. He's going to fight this all the way. Then so will we, Daniel said firmly. But fighting required resources they didn't have. Over the next week, Caleb's money dwindled to almost nothing. The mill needed repairs, the roof leaked, the windows rattled in their frames, the stove consumed firewood at an alarming rate. The children needed clothes, food, medicine. Elizabeth continued teaching them for free, but books and supplies cost money. Caleb took odd jobs around town, fixing fences, mucking stables, hauling lumber. He worked from dawn until dark, trying to stretch every dollar. But it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. One evening, he sat at the makeshift table, counting coins by lamplight. $23. That was all that stood between them and destitution. Mr. Turner? He looked up to find Micah standing in the doorway, holding a small wooden box. I've been thinking, the boy said, setting the box on the table. My father had this. It was his father's before him. He opened it to reveal a pocket watch, old but well made, the silver case engraved with initials. It's probably worth something. Micah, no, I can't take that. Why not? We need money. This can help. Because it's your father's. It's all you have left of him. Micah's eyes were steady. I have his name. I have his children to protect. I have the lessons he taught me. He pushed the box toward Caleb. This is just metal and glass. The mill, the food, keeping us together. That's what my father would want. Caleb felt his throat tighten. Your father would be proud of the man you're becoming. Then take it. Please, let me help. Before Caleb could respond, Clara appeared with a small cloth bag. I have this, she said quietly. Our mother's wedding ring and a brooch she treasured. Her voice wavered. I know they're not worth much, but... No, Caleb stood abruptly. Absolutely not. Those are precious to you. You're more precious, Clara said simply. You stayed when everyone else walked away. You fought for us in that courtroom. You ran into a blizzard to save Micah. Tears streamed down her face. We want to help. We need to help. We're a family now, aren't we? Families help each other. One by one, the other children appeared, each carrying something. Owen had a small collection of carved animals his father had made. Emma clutched a silver thimble. Even little Lily offered a china doll that had belonged to her mother. Caleb looked at the treasures spread before him, the last remnants of their parents, their old life, everything they had left to remember them by. I can't take these, he said, his voice breaking. These are your memories. Then we'll make new ones, Micah said. Better ones. Together. Caleb wanted to refuse, but he also knew they were right. They needed money, needed resources to fight Crow, needed to survive the winter. And these children were offering the most valuable things they owned because they trusted him to use them wisely. All right, he said finally, but I'm keeping a record of every item. And someday, when we're stable, when I've made enough money, I'm buying every single piece back. That's a promise. The next morning, he took the items to the town's small pawn shop. The owner, an older man named Mr. Fitzgerald, examined each piece carefully. "The watch is quality work," he said. "I can give you $40 for it. The ring and brooch may be 20 together. The rest—" He looked at the carved animals, the thimble, the doll. "These have sentimental value, but not much market value." "I understand." Caleb started to gather the items. "Wait." Mr. Fitzgerald studied him. "You're the man who took in the Rowe children, aren't you? The one standing up to Harland Crow." "I am." "My grandson worked on Crow's ranch, came home with nightmares and scars." "Mr." Fitzgerald's hands trembled slightly as he picked up the pocket watch again. "I'll give you $100 for the lot, and if you ever want to buy anything back, I'll sell it to you for exactly what I paid." Caleb stared at him. "That's far more than they're worth. Consider it an investment in making sure those children don't end up working for that monster." Mr. Fitzgerald counted out the bills. "And Mr. Turner? Thank you for having the courage the rest of us lacked." Caleb walked out with money in his pocket and tears in his eyes. The gesture reminded him that not everyone in Silver Ridge had been cowed by Crow's influence. Some people were just waiting for someone to lead. The money bought them breathing room, enough food for the month, firewood, fabric for warm clothes. Elizabeth used some of it to purchase proper school books. Dr. Merritt set aside a portion for medical supplies, and Caleb began making repairs to the mill, turning it from a shelter into a real home. But while they worked, Crow was working too. Caleb first noticed the pressure when Jack Porter apologized, but said he could no longer offer stable work. His best customer, who happened to do business with Crow, had threatened to take his trade elsewhere. The general store started charging Caleb higher prices than other customers. The boarding house refused to rent him a room when the mill's roof repairs forced them to stay elsewhere for a night. Crow was systematically cutting off their resources, isolating them, making life harder at every turn. Then the real blow came. Sheriff Morrison arrived at the mill one evening, looking deeply uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, Caleb," he said, holding up an official-looking document. "But I've been ordered to inspect this building. There's been a complaint filed that it's not suitable for housing children." "A complaint from who?" Caleb demanded. "Anonymous, but we both know." Morrison sighed. "I have to do the inspection. It's the law." The sheriff walked through the mill, making notes. The roof repairs were incomplete. Some windows still had cracks. The upstairs floors creaked. The kitchen area was makeshift at best. "I'm going to have to file a report," Morrison said. "And Caleb, it's not going to be favorable. This place needs significant work to meet housing standards." "We're working on it. We just need time." "I know, but Crow will use this report in his appeal. He'll argue that you can't provide adequate shelter." Morrison looked pained. "I wish there was another way." After the sheriff left, Caleb sat with his head in his hands. Every step forward seemed to lead to 2 steps back. No matter how hard they worked, Crow had the power and resources to undermine them. "We need allies," Dr. Merritt said that evening, gathered with Elizabeth, Daniel, and a few other supporters. "People with influence who can counter Crows." "Who?" Caleb asked bitterly. "He owns or controls everyone with real power in this town." "Not everyone," Elizabeth said quietly. "There's Margaret Ashford." The room went silent. "The widow Ashford?" Dr. Merritt said. "She hasn't been involved in town affairs in years." Exactly. Which means Crow has no leverage over her." Elizabeth leaned forward. "Her late husband owned the lumber mill and half the timber rights in the county. When he died, she inherited everything. She's one of the few people in Silver Ridge with wealth that doesn't depend on Crow's goodwill." "But she's a recluse," Daniel pointed out. "No one's even seen her in months." "Then someone needs to go see her," Elizabeth said, looking at Caleb. "Make her understand what's at stake." The Ashford estate sat on a hill overlooking Silver Ridge, a grand house surrounded by iron gates and overgrown gardens. Caleb approached on foot the next afternoon, the children's future weighing heavy on his shoulders. A stern-faced housekeeper answered his knock. "Mrs. Ashford doesn't receive visitors," she said curtly. "Please, I just need 5 minutes of her time. It's about— I know who you are, Mr. Turner, and I know about the Rowe children." The housekeeper's expression softened slightly. But Mrs. Ashford has made it very clear she wants no involvement in town matters. I understand, but those children are going to lose their home if I can't. Mary, who's at the door? The voice came from inside, cultured, older, curious. The housekeeper sighed. A Mr. Caleb Turner, ma'am. I was just sending him away. Well, don't. Show him in. The housekeeper looked surprised but stepped aside. Caleb followed her into a parlor filled with fine furniture and family portraits. A woman in her 70s sat by the fire, elegant despite her age, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. So you're the man everyone's talking about, Margaret Ashford said. The drifter who challenged Harlan Crow. I'm just trying to protect 7 children, ma'am. Just, she smiled faintly. There's no just about standing up to that man. Sit down, Mr. Turner. Tell me your story. Caleb sat and told her everything. About finding the children, the custody hearing, Crow's ongoing campaign to destroy them. Margaret listened without interruption, her face revealing nothing. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. My husband despised Harlan Crow, she said finally, thought him cruel and power-hungry. When my husband died 3 years ago, Crow tried to buy our timber rights for a fraction of their worth. When I refused, he attempted to ruin me, spread rumors, interfered with my business contracts, even tried to claim my husband owed him debts. She met Caleb's eyes. He failed because I had resources and legal protection he couldn't overcome, but I've watched him destroy others who weren't so fortunate. Then you understand why I'm here. I do, and I'm going to help you. But not out of charity, Mr. Turner? Margaret stood, moving to a desk where she pulled out papers. I'm proposing a business arrangement. I need someone to manage my timber operations. My current manager is retiring, and I've been looking for someone honest and capable. The position includes a house on the property, a steady salary, and security. Caleb's heart pounded. Ma'am, I don't have experience. You have something more valuable, integrity. And you've proven you can work hard and learn quickly. She held out the papers. This would give you stable income, proper housing for the children, and most importantly, it would give you standing that even Crow can't easily dismiss. A gainfully employed man with a respectable position is much harder to paint as an unfit guardian. Why would you do this? You don't know me. Because someone needs to stand up to Harlan Crow, and because those children deserve a fighting chance. Margaret's eyes were fierce. My husband and I were never blessed with children, but we believed in fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves. Consider this his legacy. Caleb looked at the contract, his hands shaking. It was more than he dared hope for, a way forward, a chance to build something stable. I accept, he said, and thank you, Mrs. Ashford. You've given us hope. Hope is good, but we'll need strategy too. She sat back down. Crow will fight harder now. We need to be ready. They spent the next hour planning. Margaret would provide testimony at the appeal hearing about Caleb's employment and character. She'd offer to help finance the mill's repairs to bring it up to code. And she'd make it known in certain circles that she was watching Crow's activities with great interest. When Caleb returned to the mill that evening, the children were waiting anxiously. Well? Micah asked. Caleb smiled, really smiled, for the first time in weeks. Pack your things carefully. In 2 weeks, we're moving to a real house, and I have a job. The celebration was immediate and joyful. The children danced around the room, laughing and crying. Clara hugged Caleb so hard he could barely breathe. Even Micah's carefully maintained composure cracked, tears streaming down his face. We're going to make it, the boy whispered. We're actually going to make it. We are, Caleb agreed. Together. That night, as the children slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, Caleb stood at the window, watching snow fall softly over Silver Ridge. He thought about the long road that had led him here, the grief, the running, the years of emptiness. And he thought about 7 children who'd been waiting in silence until someone asked the only question that mattered, "Will you be our family?" His answer had changed everything. It had given them hope. It had given him purpose. But most importantly, it had proven something he'd forgotten in 5 years of running from graves and memories. That healing doesn't come from forgetting the ones you lost. It comes from having the courage to love again, even when you know how badly it can hurt. Caleb looked at the sleeping faces of his children, because that's what they were now, legally and in his heart, and made a silent promise to Sarah, to Thomas, to Margaret, and Anna. "I'm living again," he told them. "I'm choosing life. I'm choosing love. And I'm not running anymore." The blizzard had passed. The storm with Crow was far from over. But for the first time since he'd ridden into Silver Ridge, Caleb Turner felt ready to face whatever came next. Because he wasn't alone anymore. He had a family. And families face the darkness together. The 2 weeks before the move passed in a blur of activity and growing anticipation. The house Margaret Ashford had promised sat at the edge of her timber property, a sturdy 2-story structure with a wide porch and enough bedrooms for each child to have their own space. It needed cleaning and minor repairs, but compared to the grain mill, it was a palace. Caleb spent his days learning the timber business from Margaret's retiring manager, a grizzled man named Samuel, who'd worked the forests for 40 years. The nights were devoted to the children, helping with homework, listening to their dreams and fears, slowly building the rhythms of an actual family. But underneath the hope, tension simmered. The appeal hearing loomed and Crow had gone ominously quiet. No more threats, no more harassment, no more interference. It was the silence before a storm, and everyone felt it. "He's planning something," Dr. Merritt warned one evening. "Men like Crow don't surrender, they regroup." "Let him plan," Caleb said, though unease twisted in his gut. "We're not defenseless anymore." The morning of the move arrived cold but clear. Daniel and Jack Porter brought wagons to transport the children's few possessions. Elizabeth arrived with a basket of food for the journey. Even Reverend Thomas came to offer a blessing, his earlier shame now channeled into genuine support. The children loaded their belongings with a mixture of excitement and disbelief, as if afraid to trust that this good fortune was real. Emma kept asking if they really, truly got to stay in the big house. Owen and Noah raced through the empty mill one last time, their voices echoing. Lily clutched her wooden horse and smiled, actually smiled, for the first time Caleb had seen. Micah stood apart, watching his siblings with an expression Caleb couldn't quite read. "You all right?" Caleb asked, approaching the boy. "I keep waiting for something to go wrong," Micah admitted. "For someone to take this away from us." "Nothing's going to take it away. Mrs. Ashford's given me a contract. The house comes with the job. It's legal and binding. Crow will still fight it. Let him." Caleb put a hand on the boy's shoulder. "We're stronger now than we were. We have resources, support, a solid foundation. Whatever he throws at us, we'll face it together." Micah nodded, but the worry didn't leave his eyes. The house was everything Margaret had promised, and more. The children explored with wide-eyed wonder. Real beds with actual mattresses, a kitchen with a proper stove, windows that didn't rattle in the wind. Claire discovered a small library, shelves lined with books left by the previous occupants. The twins found a rope swing hanging from an oak tree in the yard. "Can we really live here?" Emma whispered, standing in the doorway of what would be her bedroom. "Is it really ours?" "It's really ours," Caleb confirmed, his throat tight. "Your own room, your own bed, your own space." She threw her arms around his waist, and he felt her tears soak through his shirt. That first night in the house, Caleb made dinner while the children set up their rooms. It was simple fare, stew and bread, but they ate together at a real table, in a real dining room, like a real family. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and the occasional argument between siblings. Normal. Beautifully, wonderfully normal. After dinner, Caleb found himself standing on the porch, watching the sun set over the timber forests that were now his responsibility. The weight of it all, the children, the job, the ongoing fight with Crow, should have crushed him. Instead, it felt right, like he'd finally found the thing he was supposed to be doing. "Mr. Turner?" He turned to find all 7 children standing in the doorway, looking uncertain. "We wanted to ask you something," Clara said, stepping forward as their spokesperson. "We've been talking, and we wondered if maybe we could call you something other than Mr. Turner." Caleb's heart stuttered. "What did you have in mind?" The children exchanged glances. Finally, Micah spoke. "We know you're not our father. We know you can't replace him, and we're not asking you to." The boy's voice was steady but emotional. "But you've done everything a father would do. You've protected us, provided for us, fought for us. So we wondered if maybe we could call you Pa, if that would be all right with you." Caleb couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. He thought about Sarah, about his own children, about the family he'd lost. And he thought about these 7 brave souls who'd survived more than any children should have to survive, who were offering him a gift more precious than anything he'd ever received. "I would be honored," he managed finally, "more honored than you could possibly know." Emma was the first to test it out. "Pa," she said tentatively, "can I have a glass of water?" The word hit Caleb like a physical blow, beautiful and painful and perfect all at once. "Of course, sweetheart," he said, his voice rough with unshed tears. "Let me get it for you." One by one, they tried it out. "Pa, can you help me with this arithmetic?" from Owen. "Pa, look what I found in the library," from Clara. Even Micah, so careful with his emotions, whispered "Good night, Pa," before heading to bed. Caleb stood in the hallway long after they'd all gone to sleep, his hand pressed against the wall to steady himself, tears streaming down his face. He was a father again, not replacing what he'd lost, but building something new from the broken pieces of 2 shattered families. The peace lasted exactly 5 days. On Monday morning, Sheriff Morrison arrived at the house with papers in hand and a grim expression. "I'm sorry, Caleb," he said, "but Crow's filed an emergency motion. He's claiming that you obtained your employment with Mrs. Ashford through fraudulent means, that the arrangement is a sham designed solely to improve your custody claim." "That's absurd." Caleb snatched the papers. "Margaret hired me because she needed someone honest to manage her timber operations. I know that, you know that. But Crow's got a lawyer arguing that Mrs. Ashford has no business experience, that she's being manipulated by you, and that the position was created specifically for this custody case." Morrison looked pained. "There's going to be a hearing this Friday, 3 days before the appeal. The judge wants to examine the employment arrangement before the custody decision. This is harassment, pure and simple." "I know, but it's legal harassment." The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "There's more. Crow's bringing in a child welfare investigator from the territorial capital, someone with no ties to Silver Ridge, someone who can't be accused of bias." Caleb's blood ran cold. "When?" "Tomorrow. They'll inspect your home, interview the children, assess your fitness as a guardian." Morrison met his eyes. "Caleb, this investigator has the power to remove the children immediately if they determine the situation is unsafe or fraudulent." After the sheriff left, Caleb gathered the children and explained the situation. Their faces went pale, the joy of the past few days evaporating like morning mist. "They can't take us away," Emma said, her voice rising in panic. "We just got here. This is our home." "No one's taking you anywhere," Caleb said firmly, though fear churned in his stomach. "We're going to show this investigator exactly what we are, a family that takes care of each other." "What if it's not enough?" Micah asked quietly. "What if they decide Crow's right, that this is all fake?" "Then we fight harder." Caleb looked at each of them. "But I need you to understand something. Whatever questions they ask tomorrow, tell the truth. Don't exaggerate, don't perform, just be honest. Our strength is that we're real. Let that speak for itself." The investigator arrived the next morning, a severe-looking woman in her 50s named Mrs. Prudence Walsh. She carried a leather portfolio and wore an expression that suggested she'd seen every con and deception imaginable. "Mr. Turner," she said crisply, "I'll be conducting interviews with each child separately, inspecting the premises and reviewing your financial arrangements. I expect full cooperation." "You'll have it," Caleb said. Mrs. Walsh spent 2 hours going through the house, making notes about everything: the number of beds, the state of the kitchen, the adequacy of heating. She examined Caleb's employment contract with Margaret Ashford, reviewed his financial records, even checked the children's schoolwork. Then came the interviews. She started with Emma, the youngest, calling her into the library and closing the door. Caleb paced the hallway, listening to the murmur of voices but unable to make out words. 20 minutes later, Emma emerged, her eyes red from crying. "What did you say?" Clara asked urgently. She asked if Pa was nice to me, if he ever hurt us or yelled, if we had enough food. Emma's lip trembled. I told her the truth, that Pa saved us, that he's the best thing that ever happened to us. One by one, the children went in, Owen and Noah together since they refused to be separated. Lily, who barely spoke but apparently said enough. Clara, who emerged looking shaken but determined. Samuel, quiet and serious. Finally, Micah. He was in there the longest, nearly 40 minutes. When he came out, his jaw was set and his eyes were fierce. "What did she ask?" Caleb asked quietly. "Everything. About our parents, about how we ended up with you, about whether you pressured us to say certain things." Micah's hands clenched into fists. "I told her we'd been abandoned by this whole town, that you were the only one who stopped running long enough to see that we needed help. I told her if she took us away from you, she'd be making the biggest mistake of her life." Mrs. Walsh spent another hour in the library writing her report. Finally, she emerged and asked to speak with Caleb privately. "Mr. Turner, I've been doing this work for 15 years, she began, settling into a chair. "I've seen every variation of family situation you can imagine. Good homes, terrible homes, and everything in between." Caleb's heart hammered. And I have concerns." She held up a hand when he started to protest. "Not about your character or your care of these children. From what I've observed, you're providing a stable, loving home. The children are healthy, well-fed, engaged in their education. Then what's the problem?" "The problem is timing and optics." Mrs. Walsh set down her pen. "You appeared in these children's lives less than 2 months ago. You have no prior experience raising children. You've secured employment and housing through connections made specifically during this custody battle. To an objective observer, it could look orchestrated. It wasn't orchestrated. It was people helping other people." "I believe you, but belief isn't evidence, and in custody cases we deal in documentation and established patterns." She paused. "However, I'm not unsympathetic to your situation. In my report, I'll note that the children are thriving under your care. I'll recommend continued placement with you, pending the appeal hearing. But I'm also obligated to note the irregularities in your employment situation. Harlan Crow's lawyers will use that, and frankly, they'll have a point. A judge could easily rule that this arrangement was manufactured specifically for the custody case." After Mrs. Walsh left, Caleb felt the walls closing in. They'd gained so much ground, built so much hope, but it might still not be enough. Crow had resources, lawyers, influence. He could chip away at every advantage until nothing remained. That evening, Margaret Ashford arrived at the house unannounced. She swept in with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting her way. "I heard about the investigator," she said without preamble. "What did she say?" Caleb explained the situation. Margaret listened, her expression darkening. "Crow's trying to make it look like I'm a doddering old woman being manipulated," she said sharply. "That's his strategy. Undermine my credibility, paint our arrangement as fraudulent. I'm sorry. I never meant to drag you into this mess." "Don't apologize. I entered this fight with my eyes open." Margaret sat down, her mind clearly working. "But we need to change our approach. We've been playing defense, reacting to Crow's moves. It's time to go on offense." "How?" "By exposing exactly what kind of man Harlan Crow is. Not just whispers and rumors, but documented evidence presented in open court." She looked at Caleb intently. "You said Matthew Chen testified about his experiences on Crow's ranch. How many others like him are out there?" Dr. Merritt mentioned several former workers who'd been injured or mistreated. "Then we find them. We get their testimony. We build a case so damning that no judge can ignore it." Margaret's eyes blazed. "If Crow wants to question my judgment and your character, we'll question his fitness to be anywhere near children." Over the next 3 days, they worked frantically. Dr. Merritt reached out to former ranch workers he'd treated. Daniel tracked down men who'd left Silver Ridge rather than continue working for Crow. Elizabeth contacted families whose children had briefly worked on the ranch before their parents pulled them out. The stories that emerged were horrifying. A 16-year-old boy who'd lost 2 fingers in a sawmill accident when safety guards were removed to increase productivity. A girl of 13 forced to work 20-hour days during harvest season. Multiple accounts of beatings, starvation as punishment, dangerous working conditions ignored. But getting people to testify was another matter. Crow's reach was long and fear ran deep. "He'll ruin me if I speak up," one former worker said, shaking his head. "I've got a family to feed. I can't risk it." Your silence is what lets him hurt more children, Caleb argued. Don't you want to stop him? I want to survive. That's all I can afford to want. By Thursday night, they had statements from 3 people willing to testify, possibly 4. It wasn't enough to build an overwhelming case, but it was something. The Friday hearing about Caleb's employment came first. Crow's lawyer presented his case smoothly, pointing out the convenient timing of the job offer, questioning Margaret's business acumen, suggesting that the entire arrangement was a sham. Mrs. Ashford had no pressing need for a new timber manager, the lawyer argued. Her previous manager wasn't retiring for another 6 months. Yet suddenly, immediately following a custody hearing that didn't go Mr. Crow's way, she creates a position perfectly designed to solve Mr. Turner's credibility problems. The timing is simply too convenient to be coincidence. Margaret took the stand with her head high and her voice steady. "Young man," she said to Crow's lawyer, "I've been running a successful business for 3 years since my husband's death. I don't need anyone to tell me when I do or don't need an employee. Samuel came to me 2 months ago saying his arthritis was getting worse, and he wanted to retire early. I've been looking for his replacement since then. Mr. Turner proved himself to be honest, hardworking, and capable. That's why I hired him, not because of any custody case. But you must admit the timing. The only thing I'll admit is that I recognize quality when I see it, which is more than I can say for some people in this town." Margaret's gaze swept to Crow. "Unlike others, I don't hire people so I can exploit them. I hire them to do honest work for honest pay." The hearing lasted 2 hours. When it concluded, the judge ruled that while the timing was suspicious, there was no evidence of fraud. The employment arrangement would stand. It was a victory, but a narrow one. The appeal hearing was now just 3 days away, and that would be the real battle. That weekend, Caleb tried to maintain normalcy for the children. They had lessons with Elizabeth, helped with chores around the house, played in the yard. But the tension was palpable. Everyone was waiting, holding their breath, afraid to hope too hard. Sunday evening, Caleb was chopping firewood when a rider approached. He didn't recognize the man, middle-aged, weathered, with kind eyes and work-worn hands. "Mr. Turner?" the man asked, dismounting. "My name's Robert Chambers. I worked on Crow's Ranch 7 years ago. I appreciate you coming, but we've already gathered testimonies. I heard. That's why I'm here." Robert's expression was grim. "The things those men told you, they're true, all of it, but there's something else, something nobody's talked about yet." He paused. "Crow had a ward once before. A boy named Timothy, maybe 10 years old. Orphan, no family. Crow took him in, made a big show of charity." Caleb's blood ran cold. "What happened to him?" "Worked him near to death. The boy tried to run away twice. Second time, Crow caught him and beat him so badly he couldn't walk for a week." Robert's voice shook. "I was there. Saw it. I quit the next day and left town because I was ashamed I hadn't stopped it. That boy, Timothy, he disappeared about a year later. Crow claimed he ran off again, but you don't believe that?" "No, sir, I don't. And I've carried that guilt for 7 years. Robert looked Caleb in the eye. "I'm not going to carry it anymore. I'll testify. I'll tell everything I saw. Whatever it costs me, those children you're protecting deserve better than what happened to Timothy." The appeal hearing arrived on a Wednesday morning, cold and clear. The courthouse was packed, supporters and opponents, townspeople come to witness history, journalists from neighboring counties. The territorial judge, who'd originally ruled in Caleb's favor, sat at the bench, his expression neutral. Crow's lawyers opened with their case, systematically attacking every aspect of Caleb's custody: his transient past, his lack of parenting experience, the suspicious timing of his employment. They painted him as an opportunist taking advantage of Margaret Ashford's kindness and the children's vulnerability. Then they brought character witnesses, people who claimed Caleb was a drifter, possibly unstable, certainly unsuitable to raise 7 children. Most were on Crow's payroll, but their testimony carried weight nonetheless. When it was time for Caleb's side to respond, Dr. Merritt spoke first, reiterating his earlier testimony about conditions on Crow's Ranch. Elizabeth described the children's progress in their education, their emotional growth, their transformation from scared orphans to thriving young people. Then came the former workers. One by one, they told their stories. The injuries, the abuse, the fear. The courtroom listened in growing horror. Matthew Chen testified again, showing his scars, describing his years of running and hiding. "If those children go to Crow's Ranch," he said, his voice breaking, "you're sentencing them to the same hell I escaped." When Robert Chambers took the stand and described what had happened to Timothy, the courtroom erupted. Crow's lawyer objected furiously, claiming the testimony was hearsay about events from years ago. "It establishes a pattern," Margaret Ashford's lawyer countered, "a pattern of taking in vulnerable children and exploiting them." Judge Brennan allowed the testimony to stand. Robert described everything: the beatings, the overwork, Timothy's fear, his eventual disappearance. "Do you have any proof the boy came to harm?" the judge asked. "No, sir, but I know what I saw. And I know a child that's scared doesn't just vanish without reason." Robert looked at Crow. "That man shouldn't be allowed within 100 miles of children." Finally, it was time for the children to testify. They'd testified before, but this time felt different. This was the final stand, the last chance to make their voices heard. Clara went first, describing their life before Caleb arrived. The cold, the hunger, the fear of being separated. "Pa didn't just save our lives," she said. "He gave us back our family. He gave us back our hope." The twins spoke about being sick, about Caleb carrying them through a storm to the doctor. Owen's voice was small, but certain. "He risked his life for us. That's what fathers do." Samuel, usually so quiet, spoke about learning to smile again. Lily showed the judge a drawing she'd made. Caleb surrounded by 7 stick figures, all holding hands. Emma climbed onto the witness stand, her legs swinging above the floor. When asked what she wanted, she said simply, "I want to stay with Pa. He makes me feel like I matter." Then Micah took the stand. He looked older than 14, aged by responsibility and loss. He spoke calmly, clearly, about what Caleb had done for them. "Your Honor, my parents died in a fire. This whole town knew we needed help, and nobody stepped forward. Nobody except Mr. Turner, except Pa." Micah's voice strengthened. He had every reason not to care. He'd lost his own family, his own children. He could have kept running from that pain, but he stopped. He saw us, and he chose to stay. "And what about Mr. Crow's offer?" the judge asked. "He can provide resources Mr. Turner cannot. Mr. Crow can provide a building and food and work. Pa provides something more important. He provides love." Micah looked at his siblings. "We're not afraid anymore. We're not waiting to be scattered or broken or forgotten. We're a family, and families stay together." The courtroom was silent when he finished. Then something unexpected happened. Mrs. Chen, the seamstress, stood up. "Your Honor, may I speak?" The judge looked surprised but nodded. "Briefly, Mrs. Chen." She approached the front of the courtroom, her head high despite her trembling hands. "I want to thank Mr. Turner," she said, her voice carrying. "For 3 years I've been silent about what happened to my son. For 3 years I let fear control me. But watching this man fight for these children, watching him risk everything, it reminded me that silence is how evil wins." She turned to face Crow. "My son suffered on your ranch, and I will never forgive myself for not protecting him better. But I won't be silent anymore." One by one, others stood. Jack Porter, the owner of the general store. People who'd been afraid, who'd looked away, who'd let fear keep them from acting. "We failed these children," Reverend Thomas said, standing. "We let our fear of one man prevent us from doing what was right. Mr. Turner showed us what courage looks like. He deserves our support, not our doubt." Daniel Marsh stood. "My father died because of Harlan Crow's negligence. I've carried that anger for years, but watching Caleb Turner turn his pain into purpose, his loss into love, that's shown me a better way forward. Those children belong with him." Even Sheriff Morrison stood, looking uncomfortable but determined. "I've enforced Mr. Crow's will for too long. I'm ashamed of that. But I'm standing here now saying those children are safer with Caleb Turner than they'd ever be on the Triple C Ranch." The judge banged his gavel for order, but his eyes held something that might have been approval. Crow's lawyer jumped up, objecting to the irregular proceedings, demanding that unsolicited testimony be stricken from the record. "Overruled," Judge Brennan said firmly. This court is interested in truth and the welfare of 7 children. I'll hear from anyone with relevant testimony. Finally, it was Crow's turn to defend himself. He took the stand with his characteristic confidence, denying every allegation, painting himself as a misunderstood benefactor. These accusations are from disgruntled former employees who couldn't handle honest work, he said smoothly. The boy Timothy ran away, just as I said. I searched for him myself, contacted authorities in 3 counties. There was no foul play. And the documented injuries, Bolt? The judge asked. Accidents happen on working ranches. I've always provided medical care and compensation. Crow's voice dripped with false sincerity. I only wanted to help the Rowe children, to give them opportunities they'd never have with a drifter who appeared out of nowhere. Mr. Turner is hardly a drifter anymore, Margaret Ashford's lawyer interjected. He's a gainfully employed man with a stable home and a community of support. A community that rallied only after he manipulated them with sentiment, Crow shot back. Ideal in reality. Reality is that those children need more than warm feelings. They need structure, discipline, a firm hand to guide them. Is that what you call it? Micah's voice rang out from the gallery. A firm hand? The judge looked at the boy. You've already testified, young man. I know, Your Honor, but I need to say one more thing. Micah stood, his whole body shaking but his voice steady. Mr. Crow talks about structure and discipline. What he means is control and fear. We've heard the stories. We know what happens to children on his ranch, and I'm standing here to say that we would rather face the wilderness alone than spend a single day under his roof. Micah, Caleb said quietly, sit down. No, Pa. He needs to hear this. Micah turned to Crow. You didn't want to help us. You wanted to own us, to break us down and rebuild us into whatever suited your purposes. But we're not broken, not anymore, because someone finally showed us what real strength looks like. And it's not bullying or controlling people. It's choosing to care even when it costs you everything. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Even Crow seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Judge Brennan cleared his throat. Is there anything else? Margaret Ashford stood. Your Honor, if I may, I've lived in Silver Ridge for 40 years. I've watched this community grow and change. I've seen good people and bad, courage and cowardice. What I've witnessed in this courtroom today is a reckoning that's been long overdue. She looked at Crow. This man has ruled through fear for too long. He's hurt too many people, broken too many spirits. These children represent a chance, not just for them to have a better life, but for this entire community to remember what we're supposed to stand for. She turned to the judge. Caleb Turner may not be perfect. He may not have wealth or a prestigious family name, but he has something far more valuable, the courage to do what's right even when everyone else has looked away. Those children are thriving under his care. They're loved, safe, and happy. That's what matters. That's what should always matter. The judge looked at Caleb. Mr. Turner, do you have anything to add? Caleb stood, his mind racing. He'd prepared a speech, practiced what he'd say. But now, facing the judge and the packed courtroom and 7 children who were waiting to learn their fate, the words seemed inadequate. Your Honor, he said finally, 5 years ago, I lost everything that mattered to me. My wife, my 3 children, my purpose for living. I spent 5 years running from that pain, convinced that if I never stopped moving, it couldn't catch up to me. But pain doesn't work that way. It follows you everywhere until you finally turn around and face it. He looked at the children. These 7 kids forced me to stop running. They reminded me that life is about more than just surviving your losses. It's about finding the courage to build something new from the pieces. Are we a perfect family? No. Are we still figuring things out day by day? Absolutely. But we're doing it together, and that makes all the difference. His voice grew stronger. Mr. Crow can offer material wealth. I can offer something better. A home where children are valued for who they are, not what they can produce. Where mistakes are learning opportunities, not reasons for punishment. Where love isn't conditional on obedience or productivity. That's the kind of home these children deserve. That's the kind of home I'm committed to providing. He met the judge's eyes. I'm not asking you to give me these children. I'm asking you to let them stay with the family they've already chosen. They've been through enough loss. They shouldn't have to lose this too. Judge Brennan was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke. I'm going to take a recess to review my notes and consider everything I've heard today. We'll reconvene in 1 hour for my decision. The wait was agony. The children clustered around Caleb, alternating between hope and terror. The townspeople who'd testified milled about nervously. Even Margaret Ashford looked worried. Whatever happens, Caleb told the children, I want you to know that these past weeks have meant everything to me. You've given me back my life. You've reminded me what it means to be a father, and no matter what any judge says, you'll always be my children. We're not going to lose you, Clara said fiercely. We can't. We won't, Micah added, though his voice lacked certainty. When they were called back into the courtroom, Caleb's heart hammered so hard he thought everyone could hear it. The children held hands, a chain of support and solidarity. Judge Brennan settled into his chair and surveyed the courtroom. This has been one of the most challenging cases I've encountered in my career, he began. The law requires me to determine what's in the best interest of the children, but best interest is often subjective, colored by personal biases and societal expectations. He paused, letting the tension build. I've listened to testimony from both sides. I've heard about material resources and emotional bonds. I've learned about past behaviors and current circumstances. And I've watched 7 children make their wishes abundantly clear. Caleb held his breath. The allegations against Mr. Crow are serious and disturbing. While some cannot be definitively proven, there is enough corroboration to establish a troubling pattern of behavior. The testimony regarding the boy Timothy is particularly concerning. I am ordering a full investigation into the disappearance, as well as a comprehensive review of working conditions at the Triple C Ranch. Crow's face went purple with rage, but he remained silent. As for custody of the Rowe children, the judge continued, I find that Mr. Turner has demonstrated genuine care, commitment, and capability. The children are healthy, well-educated, and by all accounts thriving under his guardianship. While his circumstances were initially precarious, he has since established stable employment and suitable housing. The judge looked directly at the children. More importantly, these young people have made it clear where they want to be. While children's preferences aren't the only factor in custody decisions, they carry significant weight, especially when those children are old enough to understand the consequences of their choices and have demonstrated sound judgment. He picked up his gavel. Therefore, I am denying Mr. Crow's appeal. Permanent custody of Micah, Clara, Owen, Lily, Noah, Samuel, and Emma Rowe is hereby granted to Caleb Turner. Furthermore, I am issuing a restraining order preventing Mr. Crow from contacting the children or Mr. Turner directly. Any future communication must go through legal channels. The gavel came down. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the courtroom erupted. The children were crying, laughing, holding on to Caleb like they'd never let go. Clara sobbed into his shoulder. Emma clung to his leg. The twins were jumping up and down. Even Micah broke down completely, years of held-back tears finally released. We're staying, he kept saying. We're actually staying. You're staying, Caleb confirmed, his own vision blurred with tears. You're mine. All of you. Forever. The townspeople who'd supported them crowded around, offering congratulations and relief. Dr. Merritt was openly crying. Elizabeth hugged each child in turn. Margaret Ashford smiled with quiet satisfaction. Across the courtroom, Harlan Crow stood alone, his face a mask of fury and defeat. His lawyers were already packing up, distancing themselves. The people who'd stood with him out of fear were now looking away, unwilling to meet his eyes. He'd lost more than a custody case. He'd lost his grip on Silver Ridge's collective fear. And everyone in that courtroom knew it. As Crow stormed out, Sheriff Morrison stepped into his path. Mr. Crow, I'll be conducting that investigation personally, the sheriff said quietly. And I'll be talking to everyone who's ever worked on your ranch. I'd suggest you cooperate fully. Crow pushed past him without a word and disappeared into the cold morning. The celebration continued outside the courthouse. Someone started singing, and others joined in. Children played in the snow. Adults shook hands and embraced, the relief palpable. Caleb stood on the courthouse steps, watching his 7 children play together, finally, truly free. Micah caught his eye and smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. Thank you, the boy mouthed. Caleb nodded, Unable to speak past the lump in his throat, Margaret Ashford appeared at his elbow. "Well done, Mr. Turner. You've given those children their lives back." "They gave me mine first," Caleb said. "Perhaps you saved each other. That's how the best families work." She squeezed his arm. "I expect you at the timber office bright and early Monday morning. We have work to do." "Yes, ma'am." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the snow-covered town, Caleb gathered the children and started the walk home. Their home. The word still felt new and precious. They walked together through Silver Ridge, past the mill where they'd first found shelter, past the church that had given them refuge, past the houses of people who'd finally found their courage. When they reached their house, the children ran inside, already arguing about who would help make dinner and who had to set the table. Normal, beautiful chaos. Caleb stood on the porch for a moment, watching the last light fade from the sky. He thought about Sarah and his lost children, about the graves he'd run from for so long. "I kept my promise," he whispered to them. "I kept living, and I found something worth living for." Inside, Emma was calling for him. "Pa, Owen won't let me help with the potatoes." "I'll be right there," he called back. He looked up at the stars beginning to appear, brilliant and cold and beautiful. Somewhere up there, he liked to think Sarah was smiling, not because he'd replaced her or their children, no one could ever do that, but because he'd finally learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means having the courage to love again, even knowing how badly it can hurt. The door opened behind him. Micah stood there, silhouetted in the warm light from inside. "You coming, Pa? Dinner's almost ready." "Yeah," Caleb said, taking one last look at the stars. "I'm coming." He stepped inside, closing the door on the cold and the dark and the years of running. He stepped into warmth, into noise, into the beautiful chaos of a family that had chosen each other. 7 children who'd waited in silence until someone asked the only question that mattered. One broken man who'd finally stopped running from his pain, and a love that had saved them all. They gathered around the table, Caleb at the head, the children filling every seat, talking over each other, laughing, arguing, being wonderfully, perfectly alive. And for the first time in 5 years, Caleb Turner felt completely, truly home. 1 year later, on a warm spring evening, they all sat together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. The timber business was thriving under Caleb's management. The children were excelling in school. The house had become a home in every sense of the word. Emma leaned against Caleb's shoulder, nearly asleep. Owen and Noah were playing chess on the porch boards. Clara was reading aloud to Lily and Samuel. Micah sat on the steps, whittling a piece of wood, his face peaceful. "Pa?" Emma murmured sleepily. "Yeah, sweetheart? I'm glad you found us." Caleb smiled, his heart full to bursting. "I'm glad you found me too." Micah looked back at him, and in the boy's eyes, Caleb saw something he'd never thought he'd see again. The reflection of a father who was loved, needed, and would never again be alone. They sat together as darkness fell, 7 children and 1 man who'd finally stopped running. A family not born, but chosen. Not perfect, but real. Not easy, but worth every struggle. And in the quiet of that evening, with his children around him and the stars emerging overhead, Caleb Turner realized the truth he'd been running from for 5 years. He hadn't saved 7 children. They had saved him, and that made all the difference.